Pirate God Level Cartoonist, Chapter 361 to 380. Chapter 361 1 against 2. Bigmom had just walked out of the hall, and Fujitora and Kizaru instantly locked onto her figure. Kazuna, do your best to solve the battle as soon as possible. She manipulated such a large range of thunder, and the consumption must be not small. Don't give her a chance to reply. In the sky, Fujitora quietly approached Kizaru and whispered softly. Kizaru nodded silently, and immediately closed his hands together, and a solid golden light shot out. But Jingguang's target is not Bigmom, but the building beside Bigmom. The speed of the golden light was so fast that it even exceeded the limit of Bigmom's sight lock. Almost at the moment when it was emitted, it brushed past Bigmom and hit a building. There was no abnormal sound, and the moment it touched the building, the golden light began to eject. The speed of breaking through the limits of the human retina, coupled with the bizarre re-entry feature, almost in a few seconds, the golden light has already brushed dozens of times beside Bigmom. I'm on, Kizaru whispered to himself. Before he finished speaking, Kizaru's body was already emitting countless golden rays of light, and then the whole person turned into a golden light and disappeared in place. When Kobo reappeared, it instantly appeared on the spot where the golden light was ejected. That is, behind Bigmom. Looking at Bigmom whose back was still facing him, Kizaru hooked the corner of his mouth in disdain, his feet flashed with dazzling light, and kicked Bigmom with one kick. At the same time, Fujitora in front of him, at the moment Huang Yuan disappeared, suddenly drew his sword and slashed out in a volley. In an instant, a mountain-like weight appeared on Bigmom's body. The pressure was so strong that even the ground beneath Bigmom's feet showed numerous cracks. Fujitora restricts movement, Kobo attacks. The cooperation like flowing clouds and flowing water is wonderful. Victory is in sight. What are you guys happy about? Bigmom's contemptuous voice entered the ears of the two Fujitora, causing their smiles to freeze on their faces. Horrified to find that Bigmom broke free from his control with absolute brute force the moment he spoke. Before Fujitora could react, he reminded Kasaragi that a dark shadow appeared in Kasaragi's line of sight and swept towards his feet. Boom! The sound of a strong collision sounded, and Kizaru's light-speed kick and Bigmom's pitch-black sword turned around and slammed into each other, colliding with each other, making a burst of sound. The next moment, Kizaru was thrown out by Bigmom like a baseball, smashed through countless walls, and just stopped the trend of flying backwards. The strange power of Bigmom is terrifying. How is this momentum possible? It wasn't until Bigmom started that Fujitora sensed the power within Bigmom, which was like the Yangtze River, galloping endlessly, as if it had no end. The moment Fujitora sensed it, Bigmom leapt into the air and slashed at him. Under the strength that surpasses the limits of human beings, even stronger than that of giants, every time Bigmom swings the sword, the power contained is enough to destroy a battleship. Of air tearing, Fujitora frowned, resisting Bigmom's knife, but he also retreated nearly 100 meters away. And until this time, Fujitora finally confirmed his perception, that is, Bigmom is in full swing. There is no loss. This time, Fujitora was a little stunned. In his impression, Bigmom first created a tsunami that was enough to destroy the fleet, and then manipulated the thundercloud covering the entire island. Now it should be in a relatively weak state. How could it be possible? So fierce. Could it be that Bigmom's physical strength is stronger than he imagined? No, not possible. At that level of attack, even if Garp Sengoku is added together, it is impossible to use it twice in a row without the slightest side effect. Has a problem. There must be something wrong. Rao is Fujitora trying to break his head, but he can't think of how Bigmom responded so quickly. Of course, Bigmom will not give him time to think. In just 10 seconds, BIGMOM had already caught up with the retreating Fujitora and launched a series of violent attacks, which were so powerful that they shook the sky. And the palace at the feet of the two was shaky directly in the fierce battle between the two. "Hey, it hurts," is the armed color domineering. Among the ruins in the distance, Kizaru rubbed his head and stood up slowly, his face a little unhappy. Like Fujitora, he was not optimistic about BIGMOM's remaining physical strength, so he retained his preconceived notions and was caught off guard by BIGMOM. Otherwise, no matter how big the gap between the fourth emperor and the general, he would not be swatted away like a fly. "So, it's another hard fight." Kizaru moved his shoulders, looking at BIGMOM who was pressing Fujitora's frantic attack above the sky in the distance, with a playful look on his face, and a faint fighting intent between his brows. Combustion. No matter how much Kizaru wanted to be lazy, he would sort out the priorities of his gaffe. The current situation obviously does not allow him to be lazy. Otherwise, even he might die here. Thinking of this, Kizaru no longer procrastinated, the whole person turned into a golden light, and attacked BIGMOM again. Ellipsis. 9 flowers. Battle upgrades. Facing the siege of two general-level powerhouses, BIGMOM showed absolute domineering and the true power of the four emperors. The dazzling thunder flashed endlessly. Endless flames rolled and burned. The pitch-black sword danced, bringing out the sound of breaking the wind. Every time BIGMOM makes a shot, it will repel a general, and the aftermath of the battle will destroy countless houses. Of a sudden, BIGMOM actually suppressed the two of the Kizaru. The domineering that should belong to the four emperors, at this moment, is vividly displayed. Even Roha and Gilgamesh, who had been observing the naval fleet, were attracted by the fierce battle of the three. "Is this woman so strong?" Gilgamesh raised his brows and asked. Roha did not answer, but carefully observed the battle of the three, and then smiled helplessly. Fujitora is injured. BIGMOM when it was blocking the tsunami. Although the injury is not serious, it still affects Fujitora's ability to play. Originally, according to Fujitora's prediction, he and Kasaragi, who was fighting with injuries, could completely suppress the weak BIGMOM. When Zephyr and Lu Niu are over, they will be able to deal with the powerhouses of all countries, and it will be the scene of a great victory. However, the state of BIGMOM surprised him so much that now he had to bite the bullet, and the battle had changed from suppressing the original plan to procrastinating, just to prevent BIGMOM from interfering with the battle outside the city. Gilgamesh also noticed Fujitora's strangeness later. He looked at the battle of the three, and then looked at the battlefield outside the city, and couldn't help but smile coldly. That old man in purple is dead. Indeed, BIGMOM at this time also noticed the strangeness in Fujitora's actions, and began to attack Fujitora as a breakthrough. The face of BIGMOM's sudden and violent offensive, Fujitora did not investigate for a while, and was slashed with a knife. With the new and old wounds superimposed, the whole person vomited blood at that time, slumped, and his momentum plummeted. Not necessarily. Roha's voice suddenly came from his ear. Gilgamesh raised his brows and turned to look at Roha, with a curious look on his brows. He really couldn't think of any reason why Fujitora didn't die. However, when Gilgamesh, following Roha's gaze, saw the battleship that suddenly appeared in the harbor, his pupils could not help shrinking slightly, and his eyes showed a solemn look. "I have something to do at home today, and I will make up for it in the next 2 shifts during the day. The author is staying up late, so my friends who are cultivating immortals should go to bed earlier." Chapter 362 Secret Weapon. Port of the Kingdom of Protons. At this time, inside and outside the port, there are hundreds of naval warships docking here, and from time to time you can see Marines in 2s and 3s walking on the ship and patrolling. Those were the Navy soldiers who were left to guard the fleet. Most of them were Navy soldiers who were wounded in the previous tsunami, and only a few were Navy soldiers who stayed as the main defense force. And their mission is simple: if someone attacks the fleet, use their lives to stall the time, waiting for support to arrive. However, it is clear that BIGMOM has no such plan, so that the remaining navies are very bored. "Oh, I really want to go to the front line." Private Zara was lying on the railing, looking at the place where the smoke of gunpowder rose in the distance. The port is at least tens of kilometers away from the Wangcheng, and there is a jungle in the middle. Even if Zara ran to the observation deck and looked at it with a telescope, he could only see the firelight rising in the distance. As for the sound, it was really can't hear anything. "Ah, boring boring boring. What's going on?" Sora was very bored, shaking the railing in front of him, but at this moment, the deck under his feet suddenly began to shake violently. I am afraid that it should become a rolling gourd like the navy next to it. Before Zara could stand up to see what was going on, the battleship suddenly started shaking again. This time the shaking didn't end like the last time. With the harsh friction sound, Zara was horrified to find that the battleship actually began to tilt to the left. "Grip the grass, what's the situation?" Zhuo Liang put his hands and feet together and wrapped himself around the railing desperately. Until this time, he didn't have time to look at the direction of the sound of friction. Just as he turned his head, Zhuo Liang felt that his hands and feet were weak for a while, and he almost fell. Reluctantly holding his body, Zhuo Liang was horrified, looked up to the right of the battleship, and muttered to himself. What is it? On the right side of the battleship, you can still see the blue sky, but the constant fluctuation of the air and the friction in his ears tell Zara that it is not the real sky, but something invisible, an illusion created by. Zara's guess was not wrong. Soon, with the blue ripples, a huge white gold bow slowly emerged from the void and appeared on the side of the battleship at Zara's feet. Just seeing the bow, Zara can already imagine the size of the ship. It is definitely a behemoth that is more than 5 times larger than the heavy fireship under his feet. Seeing this huge platinum battleship sailing out of the void, Toru Sure was speechless. He has already recognized it. This is the Dragonoid battleship that appeared in the port of Marinfando and then mysteriously disappeared. But now, this white gold warship is in an arrogant posture, pushing aside the ships blocking the road and slowly moving forward. Until the front of the fleet, there is no obstacle in front of it. What the hell are the Tianlong people doing? Why are their warships invisible? Where did they all go before? All kinds of questions appeared in the minds of all the remaining navies, but no one answered them at all. The Major General who stayed behind may have some inside information, but due to the requirements of the upper management, he could not speak. As a result, a large number of Navy soldiers ran to the more advanced battleships and looked at the battleships of the Tianlong people, and those Navy who couldn't make it, either ran to the observation deck or ran to the sails, all of which curiously looked over. "Hey, what do you think the Tianlong people are going to do? They won't go to the battlefield, right? Ha ha ha, don't make me laugh, Tianlong people. Battlefield, are these two words related? Hey, do you think it's a frontline victory, and the Tianlong people have gone to the melee in the past? You are even more unreliable. What do the Tianlong people want to do in battle? No matter how high the military rank is, the status of the Tianlong people is high. Hey, what are they going to do? Who knows, let's see, since they can go to the front, they can't go ashore to release water. Hey, look, the boat is moving." The Navy onlookers talked a lot, and their words were full of contempt for the Tianlong people. But just as everyone was discussing, the platinum battleship in front of him suddenly moved. With the sound of a mechanical movement, the deck that was spacious enough to put down 2 battleships suddenly began to sag downward, revealing a dark void. Then, a huge metal machine slowly rose from the void. Hey, what is that? It's like a gun. Nonsense, have you ever seen a cannon without a muzzle, but a pile of metal pipes? Whatever it is, just look at it, but then again, the light on the surface of that thing is really beautiful. Looking at the huge metal machinery that suddenly appeared, everyone in the Navy couldn't help but discuss it curiously. However, no one had seen anything similar. It was a huge machine with a height of nearly 10 meters and a length of more than 30 meters. From the middle to the end, it was covered by countless metal armors. There were a lot of grooves on the surface. In the grooves, countless electric lights could be seen shuttling in it. In the front section of the machine, it is composed of countless adult waist-thick metal pillars and a large number of metal armors staggered and formed, layer by layer, like a long cone-shaped thing like a mountain. At this moment, along with the flashes of countless electric lights, an energy sphere with blue electric lights flashing on its surface gradually appeared at the front end of the cone. Initially the size of a walnut, after a few seconds it has grown to the size of a fist and continues to grow. Seeing this scene, in the Navy, there were exclamations one after another at 1:06 o'clock. At this time, even a fool can see that the Tianlong people are actually going to fire in the direction of the battlefield. Immediately, some people suspected the intentions of the Tianlong people, and tried to report to the boss or organize the behavior of the Tianlong people. However, all the requests were called back by the Major General who stayed behind. When they asked the reason, it was also a top secret, and they never said anything else. The irritable mood gradually rose among the Navy group. Their idea is very simple: regardless of whether your gun can hit the battlefield across dozens of kilometers, even if you can hit it, what if you accidentally hurt your companion? After all, in the Navy's impression, the Tianlong people are a group of bastards who only care about themselves and don't care about others. Chapter 363 Attacked by Your Own People. Tianlong People Battleship. In the main control room, a busy scene. Dozens of men and women in luxurious costumes nervously manipulated the machinery in front of them. Countless lines of data were continuously swiped on the screen, showing the progress of charging the main gun. In the center of the main control room, 3 arrogant Tianlong people sat on metal chairs in a triangle shape, looking at the projection screens above their heads. There are 5 projection screens in total, 2 of which are monitoring screens showing the battle outside the king city of Province and the battle between Bigmom and Fujitora and Kyabu in the king city respectively. The other 3 pictures above are the situation around the Platinum battleship. Ignoring the battle scenes inside and outside the royal city, the Tianlong people sitting in the second seat stopped their eyes on one of the projection screens. On the screen, the scene after the Platinum battleship was displayed. A large number of Navy soldiers gathered on the deck of the Navy battleship behind the Platinum battleship. Taking another look at the charging progress of the main gun, the Tianlong Ren, who was the second seat of the default chapter, 55, frowned slightly. Don't tell the Navy behind you to leave, after all, the recoil of the Tiantian weapon. Remind those untouchables who do not know what to do. The 08 of the Tianlong people in the last seat interrupted the second seat roughly. Looking at the indignant Navy on the screen, his face was full of disgust. The great Tianlong people personally come to help this group of pariahs. They are not only unappreciative, but also show this kind of face. What is it? Even if they are killed by the weapons of the gods, it is their honor. But, they are the Navy after all. The second officer frowned and retorted. What happened to the Navy? They can slander the great Tianlong people. Moshi said angrily, and the anger in his heart intensified. Of course they can't slander the Tianlong people, but there are nearly 1,000 navies behind us. If they die because of us, then... St. Evans, pay attention to your tone. Suddenly, a sharp screeching sound came from the front of the 2 of them. Hearing this voice, St. Evans and Moshi, who were quarreling, immediately closed their mouths and looked at it nervously. The dragon man in front. That was the commander-in-chief of their operation, one of the members of the Celestial Dragon Council, and also a close friend of their father. Evans didn't dare to provoke each other because of his reasoning. After the 2 were quiet, the Tianlong person who was sitting in the first place nodded with a satisfied smile on his face. It could be seen that he could scold the Tianlong person, which made him feel a kind of refreshing from the bottom of his heart. St. Evans, I know that you used to befriend the shame of that Tianlong person, and you inevitably got into some bad habits, but I don't want to hear words from your mouth again, do you understand? The Tianlong man held his head high, in a teaching tone. Hearing this, the Tianlong people in the last seat suddenly snickered. The sound was not loud, but it was just enough for St. Evans to hear. St. Evans froze, and nodded embarrassedly. I understand. From the beginning to the end, the chief Tianlongren did not mention the specific name of the so-called shame of the Tianlongren, but that name has long been deeply imprinted in the hearts of all Tianlongren, and has become a forbidden word among the Tianlongren. The family name is the Don Quixote family. The Don Quixote family, who voluntarily gave up the identity of Tianlong people, went to ordinary people, and was killed by ordinary people. As if someone mentioned the Don Quixote family, the atmosphere in the hall suddenly became heavy, and even the man who was manipulating the main gun on the side couldn't help but slow down. Okay, let's not talk about it. The arrogant Tianlong person nodded. Then let us continue to appreciate the so-called four emperors, the insignificance in front of the weapons of the gods. I believe that from today, the world will recall, we Tianlong talents are the strongest existence. Whether it is wisdom or strength. Hearing this, Evans and Mo Shi, who were originally somewhat depressed, suddenly looked up at the charging progress in the center of the main control room. 90%. At this moment, the energy ball at the front of the main gun was already the size of a basketball, the color was pitch black as ink, and the core part could faintly see black and red light. 91%. 93%. The breath of terror began to spread, and the riots in the Navy became more and more obvious, but no one retreated. 95%. The space around the energy ball began to fluctuate. 97%. 99%. The entire Platinum battleship began to tremble unbearably, and ripples appeared in the sea area around the battleship. The slightly more sensitive people in the Navy began to lean back quietly, but didn't step back too far. 100%. A series of slightly urgent reports sounded in the main control room of the Platinum battleship. Open black lens bracket charge is complete. Charging is complete. Start targeting. Close black lens bracket. The target moves too fast, and the hit rate is less than 30%. Close black lens bracket. According to the original plan, start sending out signals. Close black lens bracket. The signal has been sent, and the code name, Fujitora, and the code name, Kazuna, begin to limit the range of the enemy's activities. Open black lens bracket warn. Warn. Code named, Fujitora, the vital signs dropped rapidly. Close black lens bracket. The target activity space has been limited, and the hit rate is 99%. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Do you want to open fire? Close black lens bracket. Please issue an order within 3 minutes, otherwise the main gun energy will be dissipated according to the confidentiality agreement. Close black lens bracket. Hearing this, the Tianlong Ren who was sitting in the chief suddenly stood up, waved his hand, and shouted loudly. Fire! Boom! Accompanied by a low muffled sound, the cone-shaped main gun suddenly shrank, and the next moment, the pitch-black energy ball shot out instantly with a string of afterimages and air waves like ocean waves. The tyrannical recoil caused the huge Platinum battleship to retreat dozens of meters in an instant, setting off huge waves, and the whole ship let out an overwhelmed groan. The people in the Platinum battleship have long been prepared for this. Not only is there buffer equipment in the main control room, but everyone also fixes themselves on a chair to avoid recoil from causing injury to personnel. However, the sailors on the naval battleship behind them were not prepared for this. At the moment when the energy ball was shot out, a near-substantial shock wave spread around. 607. The naval battleships docked around the Platinum battleship were the first to bear the power of the shock wave. Like a toy fiddled with by a giant, the surrounding naval battleships trembled suddenly and then moved out. Fortunately, when the ship stopped, the various naval warships had already dropped their anchors and fixed the ships, so although the warships moved laterally, there was no collision accident. However, the navies standing by the railing were heavily damaged. The 100 navies standing at the forefront, as if hit by a 10,000-ton pendulum, instantly shattered their 5 internal organs and flew backwards with blood on their mouths. Although the Marines in the rear did not die immediately, the situation was not much better. Blood flowed out of their 7 orifices, and everyone fell down like dominoes, stunned and weak. The power of the shock wave completely swept the small half of the fleet, and only those navies who did not participate in the onlookers barely escaped. The originally noisy naval fleet became quiet in an instant. After an unknown amount of time, on the front of the fleet, on a ship closest to the Platinum battleship, a burly man in a major general's costume and a navy cloak stood up. He didn't care about the blood flowing from his ears and nose, but looked around blankly. Everywhere I saw, there were corpses lying all over the ground, groaning all over my ears, like a hell-like scene. Dragon people, dragon people, dragon people. Chapter 364 The Power of Destruction. Time rewinds to the first few minutes of the Platinum battleship's main battery firing. Above the sky of the royal city, BIGMOM still suppressed Fujitora and the two with a fierce attitude. As Fujitora, who was being cared for most by her, his face was covered in blood and his clothes were tattered, but even so, the movements in Fujitora's hands did not slow down in the slightest. Between the heavens and the earth, the dazzling purple ons shuttled and flickered endlessly. The gravity within a radius of 1,000 meters was sometimes strong and sometimes weak, involving BIGMOM's footsteps. All the people who accidentally broke into Fujitora's control range, even standing, can't stand still. On the other side, with the Tiankong Yunjian created by the ability, the figure of the yellow monkey disappears from time to time. Even in the face of BIGMOM's amazing defensive ability, the sharp lightsaber can also cut out bloodstains on BIGMOM's body. It's just that those scars on ordinary people are enough to be seriously injured. On BIGMOM's body, they are really small and pitiful. However, Fujitora couldn't hold on to that time. If Fujitora couldn't continue fighting, Kisararu alone would not be able to resist BIGMOM at all. This point, Kizaru understands, and Fujitora also understands, but neither of them can't think of a solution, and they can only watch the situation get worse and worse. On the contrary, BIGMOM became more and more excited as she fought, and the thrill of crushing the two generals made her feel extremely comfortable. But at this moment, BIGMOM suddenly noticed the movements of Fujitora and Kayaburu, and stopped for a while, as if listening to something. After that, BIGMOM was surprised to find that the two people who were slippery like Loach actually started to attack. And it still looks like he is going all out, leaving no room for it. What's the situation? Could it be that the Navy has reinforcements coming? An instant, BIGMOM recalled a personal face in his mind, Garp, Sengoku, 5 old stars. Each of them was enough to turn the tide of the war. Because they were worried that there would be naval reinforcements and sneak attacks in the dark, BIGMOM was briefly suppressed by Kisotori and Fujitora for a while. Just as BIGMOM resisted the attack and searched the surroundings with a domineering look, a sudden sense of crisis surged through his body, and a flash of light flashed in his mind. BIGMOM suddenly remembered what Roha had told him, and hurriedly turned his head to look at the port. Go! At this time, the main gun of the Platinum battleship fired, and the pitch-black energy ball whistled out. Within 3 seconds, it spanned a distance of dozens of kilometers and approached the battlefield at extreme speed. Oops! Big MOM didn't have time to think about the terrifying power in the energy ball, and hurriedly dodged sideways. However, at this moment, a purple shadow appeared in front of BIGMOM, and abruptly used his body to block BIGMOM in place. Bastard, get out of here! BIGMOM raised his hand and slashed at Fujitora's shoulder. However, Fujitora didn't move. Instead he grinned equals a dazzling purple on erupted in his hand, and the ability of gravity rebound was used, trying to push BIGMOM to the energy ball above the track. However, when the purple ons were flourishing, Fujitora suddenly spit out a lot of blood, and the light in his hand dissipated in an instant. The injuries accumulated in Fujitora's body actually exploded at the most critical moment. It's over. This thought appeared in Kizaru's mind. Survived. A trace of excitement appeared on Bigmom's frightened face. 10 meters away from Bigmom within 0.01 seconds. The Navy's long-planned beheading plan is about to fall short. No wonder. Boom. In the sight of Bigmom's fear and excitement intertwined, the dark ball exploded when it came to a place more than 10 meters away from her. This energy ball is not a direct cannonball at all. As soon as this thought appeared in my mind, the explosion had already engulfed Bigmom, and a black energy ball with a diameter of 100 meters suddenly appeared in the sky above the king city of Protons. Fujitora. Seeing that Fujitora was also involved, Kizaru looked anxious and rushed in to save people. However, the next moment, the energy ball in front of him suddenly began to collapse. A trembling sense of fear suddenly surfaced in his mind. Kizaru's expression tightened, and the next moment he followed his instinct and fled into the distance. The speed of Kizaru's desperate escape was astonishing, but even so, when he just ran less than 100 meters. Explosion, start. Boom. Kizaru only heard an explosion, and then a trace of blood spattered in his ears, and he could no longer hear any sound. Immediately afterwards, a violent hurricane blew from behind, and a chaotic gust of wind swept across the sky and the earth. Kizaru didn't dare to look back, and still ran away desperately. But even so, there was a pain like concentrated acid corrosion on Kyabu's back. Afterwards, the pain intensified, until after a few seconds, Kizaru could no longer bear the pain behind his back, his eyes went blank, and he passed out. Time passed little by little. I don't know how long it took. The yellow monkey finally regained consciousness. Dazedly opened his eyes, he was stunned for a while, and the pupils of the yellow monkey just returned to focus. At this time, in front of Kyabu were several sloping slates, and he was lying in the middle of the slates. Buried under the ruins. After looking around, Kizaru understood his situation. By the way, what happened to Fujitora? Recalling that before he was unconscious, seeing Fujitora being involved in the explosion, Kizaru looked anxious and pushed away the slate to see what was going on outside. However, just after the hand was raised, a heart-piercing pain came from the back, and the pain was so severe that Kisamu couldn't help groaning. He, who had glitter fruit early on, had never suffered such a severe injury, and for a while, Kizaru was trembling in pain. Don't look at it, he knows that behind him, from the back of his head to his back, to his legs, must be corroded. The reason why he didn't wake up from pain before was entirely because of the protective mechanism of the brain that put him into a forced coma, but now, since he woke up, he had to bear the pain himself. The pain was too severe, and Kizaru gritted his teeth subconsciously, trembling all over, and began to think about other things, trying to divert his attention and quickly adapt to the pain. What the hell is that ghost thing just now? It can actually hurt me. That's the secret weapon that the Warring States Marshal said. Something from the Tianlong people. The power is really terrifying. Fujitora was caught in that kind of thing, can he still live? After thinking about it for a long time, the yellow monkey finally got used to the pain, gritted his teeth, stretched out his hand and pushed it hard. The slate in front of him suddenly fell out, and the sun shone on the yellow monkey's face again. The warmth and geniality gradually calmed Kizaru's mood, and the pain lingering on his body seemed to have dissipated a lot. After a few breaths, Kizaru stood up, jumped onto the stone slab beside him, raised his head, and looked. This is. When Kizaru saw the scene in front of him, his pupils suddenly contracted into a small dot, an unbelievable look appeared on his face, and his body began to tremble. This time, not because of pain, but because of fear. The king city of Protons has disappeared. Chapter 365 Final End. That ghost. What is it? Kizaru said in a low voice, his voice hoarse because of the shock in his heart. The once beautiful scenery and magnificent buildings of the King Protons city have already existed in name only. The four walls and the remnants of the buildings, like dominoes, were neatly dumped to the outside, and in the center of the royal city, there was a huge deep pit with a diameter of unknown number of kilometers. There is nothing in the pit. Slowly walking to the edge of the deep pit, Kizaru gently reached out and stroked the rock and soil on the edge. A strange touch came from the palm of his hand, as if he had touched a warm and smooth jade. Feeling the touch in his hand, he looked around, and the back of Kizaru felt a chill. Disappeared. Everything in the pit disappeared. Ordinary artillery shells explode, although a small pit will also be created, but the sand, gravel and clods inside will also be blown to other places. However, even if Kyabu jumped into the sky, he did not see the tens of thousands of tons of sand, countless buildings, and the remnants of the army in the City of Nations. Everything is gone. It was as if there was an invisible big hand that dug out some of the pits and left nothing behind. Fujitora. Kasaragi put his hands close to his mouth, and shouted at the release of life in the pit, trying to find signs of Fujitora's survival. However, at this moment, even Kisurugi didn't think Fujitora could survive that kind of attack. The Navy has lost another general. Something really happened now. Kizaru no longer had the lazy 497 expression on his face, and muttered to himself with a bitter expression on his face. In that bitter expression, there was a trace of deep fear hidden in it. That's right, it's fear. He was ordered by the Warring States period, and of course he knew who the holder of this weapon was. Dragon people. Recalling some Tianlong people he had seen before, thinking of the other party's stupid appearance, disgusting arrogance, and cowardly body, Kizaru shook his head involuntarily. In the future, he should think again about how to treat the Tianlong people. If one day annoys those arrogant guys and gives him such an attack, I am afraid he will also go down with Fujitora. Thinking of this, Huang Yuan sighed, took a step, and walked towards the deep pit below. Anyway, I still have to try to find Fujitora. Not long after Kizaru looked for it, the battle on the city walls of the king's city also stopped. In the face of the shock wave coming from behind and the collapsed city wall, the armies of the nations who fought fiercely on the city walls were dealt a devastating blow. On the other hand, although the navy was also greatly affected, it was still in a better situation than the armies of the nations. After a short repair, it completely defeated the armies of the nations. After giving some orders, Lu Niu, Crane, Zephyr and others rushed to the royal city and saw the yellow 8K%. After hearing the news of Fujitora's death, everyone was stunned, looking sad and unbelievable. Why? 10 minutes later, the news of Fujitora's death spread throughout the battlefield all of a sudden. The joy of victory was diluted, and a thick cloud shrouded everyone's hearts. For a time, countless soldiers from all countries who surrendered were used by the navy as a tool to vent their anger, and mourned everywhere. This war, in a gesture no one could imagine, ended. The deep pit in the center of the royal city is deeply imprinted in everyone's heart, even Roha is no exception. Its terrifying destructive power. Roha stood on the top of the mountain more than 10 miles away from the King Prudence, looking at the King Prudence in the distance, and whispered. But fortunately, the ideal town can still defend against this thing. Shaking his head, the lingering light around Roha gradually dissipated. At this time, he turned around and looked at the person behind him. It was a blood-stained, huge, bloated woman. Bigmom who should have died in the explosion. At this time, beside Bigmom, there were still Fujitora in tattered clothes and covered in blood, as well as several core members of the Big Mom pirates. If I hadn't moved fast, you would have been dead. Roha muttered as he took out a small porcelain bottle from his arms and fed Bigmom and Fujitora a fairy bean. Although Roha successfully used teleportation to fish Bigmom and Fujitora out of the explosion at the last moment, the two of them still received a certain impact. Bigmom was seriously injured, and Fujitora, who was seriously injured, almost died. If you want to save these two people, only a bug-level drug like Shondo can do it. Long for Bigmom and Fujitora's breathing to calm down. Glancing at Fujitora, Roha picked up his collar, activated teleportation, found a safe place and threw it down. When Roha came back, he didn't say much, and kicked Bigmom's face. "Don't sleep, get up quickly." The head was attacked, Bigmom groaned, and then slowly opened his eyes. "I'm not dead." Big Mom sat up blankly, first looked at his hands, and then when she saw Roha on the side, she already understood what happened. "You saved me. Otherwise." Roha curled his lips and waved his hand casually. "Hurry up and take your people away, and the Navy will search it for a while, and it will be troublesome." "My people." Bigmom, who had just sat up, still didn't understand the situation, and looked around. Falling to the ground, Katakuri and the others, who were unconscious, suddenly entered her field of vision. "Really saved." Bigmom's face showed a look of joy, and immediately looked at Roha with some expectation. "Where are the others?" "Over there." Roha pointed in the direction of the royal city faintly. Roha's gaze, when Bigmom saw the tragic state of the king's city, he froze and sighed. "All dead." "Almost, apart from the captives, only you and the people you named survived," Roha said lightly, and immediately hooked his lips, looking at Bigmom with some sarcasm. "You can still care about those miscellaneous things. The life and death of the fish. People like Katakuri, you only let me save them to keep the team behind, right?" Exposed by Roha, Bigmom's face froze, and then he patted the dust on his body a little embarrassedly, and stood up. His face no longer had the previous painful color. As early as when she agreed to trade with Roha, she had expected the current result, and the reason for making that gesture was to win Roha's sympathy. Since it has been dismantled, Bigmom is not going to be installed. Children and so on, just reborn, subordinates and so on, you can find a lot of them. Ask Roha to save people, although there is really some friendship, but not many. Bigmom really cares about an Roha trade. "The transaction is complete?" Bigmom asked. Hearing this, Roha hooked the corner of his mouth and nodded. "It's done. Then you will take your people and find a secret place to live for a while, and come out after everything is over." "I know." Bigmom nodded, and immediately asked, "Then what are you next?" "I still have business. I won't accompany you. The prepared boat is at the southeast corner of the island. There is no naval patrol there. It'll be fine if you go quickly." Roha told him to speak, and after a few simple conversations with Bigmom, he disappeared in place. Bigmom looked at the place where Roha disappeared, and after a while, he exhaled a turbid breath and finally relaxed. From the very beginning of the deal, Roha was half tempting and half coercive to force her to agree, and she has always been worried that Roha would kill her if she was dissatisfied, so she has been worried until now. And now, the transaction has ended, and Roha doesn't seem to regret it. That is to say, she can finally feel at ease. Next, just wait for Roha to fulfill the promise, and everything will end. Lord of Souls. Establish a real kingdom. Really looking forward to it. Chapter 366 Naval Rebellion. From Bigmom, Roha had already appeared on a cliff in the port of Protons. "Gilgamesh is waiting here. How's the situation?" Roha asked impatiently as soon as he landed. "Nothing happened. That group of stupid bastards seems to have caused public anger. They are being besieged by naval warships in the port and can't leave." Gilgamesh leaned on the trunk and pointed lazily in the direction of the port. Following what Gilgamesh pointed, Roha saw the situation in the port. At this time, the platinum battleship of the Tianlong people was moored in the center of the port, and at the exit of the port, dozens of naval battleships firmly blocked the exit, and the main guns on the ship were aimed at the platinum battleship in the port. And further afield, more naval battleships are approaching here. "I actually messed up the remaining navy. What did the Tianlong people do?" Roha couldn't help but asked curiously. Hearing Roha's question, Gilgamesh chuckled sarcastically. Of course not for Roha, but for the stupid behavior of the dragons. Afterwards, Gilgamesh pushed the platinum battleship out of the naval battleship, to the death of countless navies, and then to being besieged by the navy. he told Roja one by one. After listening to it, Roja's face showed a look of crying and laughing. These guys from Tianlong are really dying. Originally, their reputation in the Navy was in a mess. After doing this, it is estimated that it will be more difficult for the Tianlong people to use the Navy in the future. When a country's rulers and military institutions have irreconcilable contradictions, the country is not far from destruction. Or, give them another fire. Looking at the confrontation in the distant port, Roja couldn't help but raise this idea in his heart. But the next moment, the Tianlong people used practical actions to slap Roja in the face, letting Roja know that in terms of death, the Tianlong people don't need anyone's help. With a burst of light, the Platinum battleship actually fired at the naval battleship in front of it. Although it was not the main gun that destroyed the king city of Protons, but the small machine guns on both sides of the Platinum battleship, even so, the naval fleet was caught off guard. In the face of 6 high-tech shipborne heavy machine guns, which together shoot tens of thousands of bullets per minute, the Navy's warships are no different from paper ships. Several heavy firepower battleships with horizontal bars in the front were battered in an instant, and one of them was directly swept away by 4 machine guns. There were a lot of water leaks on the whole ship and began to sink into the sea. The Navy who blocked the Tianlong people never expected that the Tianlong people actually dared to do it. They surrounded the Tianlong people, but it was just a spur of the moment. They didn't dare to do anything if they were surrounded. They just wanted to wait for the senior generals to come back and preside over the overall situation for them. Therefore, the attack of the Tianlong people knocked them out all of a sudden. Fight back. But the other party is a Tianlong person. If they dare to attack a Tianlong person, it will be the death penalty. Don't fight back. If they don't fight back, they will be killed. In a few hours, thousands of navies and dozens of warships were caught in a situation of passive beating. Even if their companions were injured and died in the previous attack, they could only silently bandage them and collect their bodies. Dare not take any action. After a while, the shrill voice of the Tianlong people's strafing came out from the Platinum battleship. Damn pariahs, get the hell out of here. Otherwise, you'll all die. Pariah. Get out. All to die. The insulting words caused anger in the hearts of many navies, but due to the status of the Tianlong people and the power of the Platinum battleship, everyone dared not speak out. But at this moment, a roar came from the fireship that was about to sink. The roar of naval gunfire. Fuck you goddamn people. Hundreds of navies were killed before, but now they are still firing on us. Still calling me a pariah. When I killed the pirates, you were behind the scourge of the people. What kind of bullshit are you? I've lost my hands, and it's useless to live in the future. Why don't the Navy quit? I'm going to kill you guys and kill the people. Brothers of the 731 ship. The ship is going to sink anyway. Come and fill the cannonballs for I who are willing to do it. Kill these son of a bitch Tianlong people. The one who yelled was a burly, dark-skinned naval lieutenant. He was only in his 20s. At this time, he was covered in blood, and one arm had been broken by Keegan, leaving only a little flesh and blood connection hanging there. At this time, he was holding a cannonball with the only hand left, filling the naval gun in front of him, with a crazy look on his face. Just when everyone turned their attention to him, a screeching scream sounded in the air, and the next moment, the one-armed naval lieutenant was torn apart by thousands of bullets and fell into a pool of blood. Until his death, he held the cannonball in his hand. Silence. Deathly silence. Only the sound of the Tianlong people shooting the lieutenant's body echoed in the air. The 3,000 Navy members who stayed behind were all stunned, hiding behind the cover, staring at the gradually icy Navy lieutenant, their eyeballs gradually covered with bloodshots. I'm going to kill them, who will? ... 9 flowers. Suddenly, a low voice, with a trace of tragic charm, came out on a small warship, awakening everyone. I'm coming. I'll go to your place right away. A rough voice came from another large warship. The next moment, a strong Navy man with a beard jumped on the railing, and he was about to move towards jump on the boat next to you. But before he could jump, he was dragged down. That was the only rear admiral left behind. Bastard, what are you doing? The Major General's shout echoed on the naval fleet, like a basin of cold water poured on everyone's hearts, but the Major General's next sentence made everyone stunned. Is there no cannon on Lao Tzu's ship? Do you use it on other ships? Seeing that the bearded man was still standing there, the Major General kicked him angrily and scolded, "What are you doing standing still? Fill the cannonball for Lao Tzu." After speaking, the Major General took a microphone, hid behind a bridge, and spoke slowly, and the voice reached everyone's ears along the broadcast. I know that not all of you are willing to be enemies with the Tianlong people, so you must listen to what I say next. Those who do not want to be enemies with the Tianlong people, retreat. If you have parents, wives and children, retire. Those who are obsessed and have something to do, retire. The rest of the people, walk me over to your fort, put the cannonballs on Lao Tzu, and kill those damn Tianlong people. Chi chi chi. The sound of a series of bullets penetrating the steel plate sounded from the broadcast, which was the attack launched by the Tianlong people locking the position of the Major General. Fortunately, after 10 seconds, the Major General's voice sounded again. Also, listen to me, this time I can't afford it, neither can the warring states marshal. So in order not to implicate the marshal, after killing them, everyone will be gathered on a boat for Lao Tzu to run. If you are caught up by the lackeys of the Tianlong people, you will die with them. If you don't catch them, I will take you to the end of the world and kill the pirates. Kill the Tianlong people. After speaking, the Major General jumped out of the bunker, grabbed a cannonball, and threw it towards the Platinum battleship. Boom! The roar of the explosion of the shells awakened countless navies, and the words of the Major General reverberated in their hearts. A slender Navy man in a major's uniform stood up first, walked silently to the fort, and started loading artillery shells. His behavior was like flipping a switch. Countless navies walked out of the bunkers, or manipulated artillery, or took out firearms, and began attack. Chapter 367 What's the situation? Port of the Kingdom of Protons. Nearly 100 naval warships completely sealed the port, desperately venting their firepower to the Platinum warship in the center of the port. Thousands of shells, like the rain, the dark gunpowder smoke has shrouded the Platinum battleship, and no corners can be seen at all. Only the attack flying out of the gunpowder and the blue light can prove it. Platinum battleships still maintain a considerable degree of combat power. At this time, in the main control room of the Platinum battleship, the alarm has already sounded. Open black lens bracket warn. Warn. The ship is under attack. The ship is under attack. Close black lens bracket. Energy shield residual 63%, 62%, 61%. Open black lens bracket. Please take countermeasures as soon as possible. Please take action as soon as possible. Close black lens bracket. The three celestial dragons sat motionless in the center of the main control room, watching the screen of the live broadcast of the battle, with a gloomy and terrifying expression next to the energy bar with less and less energy shields. Although this battleship is called the weapon of the gods, it actually belongs to the gods, that is, the things on the Uranus, and it only has energy delivery devices, invisible position generators, main guns, shipborne heavy machine guns, and small shields. Generators, these functional devices are nothing but the technology of the world government. In this case, if the shield is broken, the armor of the Platinum battleship alone cannot withstand the bombardment of so many battleships, and it will be blown to pieces in an instant. Damn, these darn pariahs, how dare they attack us? The Tianlong man sitting at the chief slammed the table viciously, furious. What should I do? This ship's shield generator is only the smallest, and it can last for 10 minutes at most. St. Evans said anxiously. At this moment, the battleship swayed violently, the chief lost his seat, his head slammed into the back of the chair, and he howled in pain. Useless trash. How come you got hit again? The chief scolded the personnel on the console while covering the back of his head. Sir, the other party threw the cannonball in while we opened the shield crack to attack. Counterattack. Fight back. You fought back for so long. Those untouchables are still firing. What are you doing? Yes. The other party uses vacant battleships as bunkers, and machine guns can't hurt them. The machine gun doesn't work. Just use the main gun. Suddenly the Tianlong man at the end of the table said loudly, and before everyone could reply, he turned his head and said to the chief Tianlong man, Sir, use the main gun. If we go on like this, I'm going to die here. Even the lowest level of energy storage can kill this group of rebels. Main artillery. Evan's eyes widened, and he exclaimed loudly, You want to use the main artillery to hit the Navy? Do you know there are thousands of people there? If you eliminate them all, then we will. Snapped. A crisp slap echoed in the main control room. For a while, the originally noisy main control room became quiet in an instant, and everyone looked in horror at the chief who stood up and St. Evans, who covered his face. What did they see? St. Evans was slapped. The Tianlong people were beaten by the Tianlong people. This scene is simply too exciting. It was so explosive that everyone other than the Tianlong people wanted to gouge out their own eyes. They can't control what happens between the Tianlong people, but they can't control it. But if St. Evans is beaten into anger and wants to kill all the people they see, it's not too simple. Thinking of this, all ordinary people turned their heads in unison, lowered their heads, looked at their noses, noses at their mouths, mouths at their hearts, and never dared to look up again. St. Evans covered his face, buzzing in his mind, completely unable to think. When was he beaten? When he was a child? A look of resentment gathered in his eyes. On the other hand, the chief also noticed that his actions were too outrageous, but he couldn't let go of his body to apologize, so he turned his head with a cold snort. Prepare the main gun. Charge 5%. Understood. Start preparing the main gun. Charge 5%. Energy delivery devices start connecting. The main guns are starting to rise. The main gun has been raised. Start charging. In the smoke of gunpowder, the guns on the bow of the Platinum battleship slowly rose, aiming at the fleet in front. Seeing this, there was an exclamation in the Navy, but no one retreated, and the attack became more violent. They didn't know that this main gun had just destroyed the entire king city of Prudence with one blow, and now they want to destroy all of them. Electricity surged, rays of light converged, and a small energy ball appeared at the front of the main gun. A strange atmosphere began to appear in everyone's heart. A hurried report sounded in the Platinum battleship. 1%. 3%. 5%. Charge is over. May I ask if you want to launch? Everyone in the Platinum battleship looked at the Tianlong man sitting in the first place, and swallowed nervously. When the cannon was fired, they were completely on the opposite side of the Navy. But if they don't open, they will be directly killed by the furious Navy. Look at what I'm doing, shoot. Hearing this, the shield generator operator and the main gunner shook at the same time, then raised their trembling fingers and slowly pressed the button in front of them. Boom. A roar sounded, and the Platinum battleship shook a few times, and then everything was calm. The bombing sound of the Navy outside suddenly stopped. Is it over? Someone whispered. It's over, no one can survive the main gun attack. Also, but those people are the Navy, or the elites from all over the place. What will we do in the future? Who cares? There are adults here, and we can't be blamed at all. 2.2. HMPH, stupid guy, you can only be quiet when you're dead. Hearing the discussion around, the chief Tianlong snorted coldly and leaned back on the chair, with no guilt on his face. St. Evans, who was beside him, had a gloomy face and lowered his head, not knowing what he was thinking. But at this moment, the flashing red light came on, and the rapid alarm sounded throughout the main console. Warning! Warning! Damaged main gun. Failed to fire. Detect damaged status. The main gun is damaged more than 65% and cannot be used anymore. Attempt to recover. Badly damaged, failed to recover. Quote. Listening to the alarm in the battleship, everyone froze in place, full of horror. What's the situation? Chapter 368 Supreme Court. Main gun. Ruined. 3 Tianlong people sat in a chair at a loss. The news that the main gun was destroyed echoed in his mind. The alarm of the battle will not go wrong, that is to say, the main gun that can rank in the top 10 among all the weapons of the Tianlong people, was destroyed under their hands. This problem is simply too deadly. After killing thousands of navies, the Tianlong people can still escape back to Marijoa, waiting for the Tianlong family to compete with each other. But the main battery was destroyed, and it was useless for them to escape back to Marijoa. Because even the Celestial Dragon Council will not forgive them. The weapons in Uranos are too high in technology, and cannot be repaired at all with the technology level of the world government. What to do? What to do? At the end of the banquet, the Tianlongren spun around in a hurry, and when he thought of going back to face the accountability of the Tianlongren Council, he had the urge to cry. Although the chief celestial dragon didn't move, there was a large water trail under his chair. Turn on deck surveillance now. I want to see who destroyed the main gun. The guards take good weapons and guard against the enemy's surprise attack. Deploy the energy shield again. The main gun was not fired successfully, and the opposing naval fleet may attack. Everyone be careful. St. Evans showed a calm and methodical command. In the Platinum battleship, everyone immediately started to get busy. However, the monitoring on the deck was also damaged and could not be deployed. Seeing this scene, St. Evans frowned and didn't speak. Instead, he waited until the guards got the weapons and started to deploy, and then walked onto the deck surrounded by a large number of guards. Pushing open the door leading to the deck from the cabin, St. Evans saw someone he could never have imagined. "Oh, you finally came out. I'm sorry, when I just landed, it seemed that I broke your cannon." The man in the yellow suit looked at everyone who walked out of the cabin with a smile, although he was apologizing, but there was no apology on his face. Kazuna. St. Evans raised his brows, looked at the yellow monkey, and then looked at the naval fleet that ceased fire in the distance. He already understood what happened in his heart. I am afraid that someone in the Navy notified the frontline army and reported the situation here, so the fastest yellow monkey will come non-stop. As for why the main gun was destroyed, I can understand with my butt. No matter how Kizaru is an admiral of the Navy, how could he just watch, destroy the weapons of the King City of Prudence, and open fire on the naval fleet? Stepped on it, it's just that he gave Tianlong one step down. But what if it is a step down? The current situation is not a matter of face at all. See. Kazuna, you really don't know the value of this cannon. St. Evans stared straight at the cannon without a hint of fear on his face. In the face of the mad rebels, he may lose his temper, but in the face of the admiral, Evans is still a proud Tianlong. Kizaru raised his brows, glanced at St. Evans with interest, and couldn't help repositioning the other party in his heart. This young boy is different from ordinary Tianlong people. If it were other Tianlong people, I am afraid that they would have a high-minded attitude when they met, and this kid, apart from being arrogant, his words are not so disgusting. But, Kazuna is not someone who likes to argue with each other. Talk to them about these words. Kasaragi replied lazily, and after he finished speaking, he jumped towards the fleet in the port without looking back. Them. Before Evans could react, there were 2 consecutive heavy landing sounds behind him. Looking back, Crane and Zephyr had already stood on the deck without knowing when. Crane looked at the large amount of blood and floating corpses in the waters of the port, and then looked at the miserable naval fleet, and his brows suddenly wrinkled. When he looked at Evans Saint again, his face was very ugly. "Your Excellency, why are you attacking the port fleet? Do you want to interfere with this crusade?" When another person spoke, the situation was immediately different. Crane classified this incident as a crusade in one sentence, which made St. Evans frown. Block the crusade. Keenly aware of the big hat that the Crane buckled down, St. Evans' face was a little ugly. This crusade was a proposal jointly passed by the Celestial Dragon Council and the world government. He, the third son of the Celestial Dragon family, could not afford such a big hat at all. Immediately, St. Evans retorted, "Lieutenant General Crane, pay attention to your words. It was the naval fleet that attacked us first, and we also have monitoring of their active attack in our hands. Of course monitoring or something, it can be completely faked." Evans' Sacred Heart sneered secretly. From the Crane known as the Big Staff. The Crane did not speak, but frowned and glanced at St. Evans, and then said coldly, "Then you killed nearly 1,000 Navy. Is it wrong to fight back in self-defense?" St. Evans nodded slightly, feeling that he had taken the initiative. "You." Hearing this, Zephyr took a step forward with anger, and his killing intent skyrocketed. "Zephyr." He stretched out his hand to stop Zephyr, glanced at the people who were frightened by Zephyr in disgust, and said coldly, "It's useless to say these things here. 843 I hope you can do this when you are in the Supreme Court. Say. Remember, the Navy will never let it go, even if you are a dragon." Supreme Court. Hearing this word, St. Evans' arrogant aura instantly wilted, and his heart was very uneasy. The Supreme Court is a judicial body jointly led by the members of the Dragon Council, the 5 Old Stars, the Commander-in-Chief of the World Government, and the Admiral of the Navy. It has always tried only prisoners who pose a great threat to the world or have a high status. It is also the only place other than the Heavenly Dragon Council that can judge the Heavenly Dragons. Thinking that he and the other 2 would be sent to the Supreme Court, a look of fear flashed in St. Evans' eyes. Crane glanced coldly at St. Evans, who was trembling a little, and forcibly pulled Zephyr beside him, and left the Platinum Fleet. Even if the Crane at this time wanted to smash everyone on the Platinum battleship into 10,000 pieces, she couldn't do that. Just because the other party is a Tianlong person. Back in the Navy fleet, looking at a group of Navy soldiers who looked at her in disappointment, Crane sighed silently. This time, even if the Saints of Evans were executed, the rift between Tianlong and the Navy could not be restored. Everyone with a heavy heart did not realize that when they were cleaning up the tragedy, a dark shadow quietly got into the Platinum battleship. There is one chapter left, to be added during the day. Chapter 369 Coming to Oranos. Rojas shuttled among the Platinum battleships, and quickly found the main control room following the domineering guidance of seeing and hearing. The auto-sensing metal gate slowly opened to both sides. "St. Evans, how's the situation? How is it?" The Tianlong man in the last seat turned around in a hurry, and when he saw Roja, he couldn't help but be stunned. The next moment, before his face tightened, he stood up suddenly, and he was about to exclaim, but before he could speak, he saw a strange blue light in Roja's eyes, and instantly, the pupils of Tianlong lost focus, like a puppet, stood there, motionless. "The Eater's Prey, mind control." Hearing the voice behind, the chief Tianlong and more than 30 people who had not left the console immediately turned around and looked at the door. But without exception, after they met Roja's eyes, they instantly lost consciousness, and only looked straight at Roja without moving. Controlling more than 30 people at once, even Roja felt dizzy. Knowing that the time is short, the dragon guard above will arrive soon, and Roja no longer hesitates, and begins to quickly issue the order that he has long thought of. Soon, one person after another began to act, deleting surveillance video about Roja, extracting battleship data, and counting weapon databases. However, the weird thing is that even if they pass by Roja and hear Roja's brainwashing words, they will naturally go around as if they didn't notice anything. At this time, all Roja's actions are reasonable in their eyes. For these mentally weak people, the superpowers of the spiritual system are completely incomprehensible. Once they are recruited, they will instantly become puppets at the mercy of others. After brainwashing everyone and asking some key information incidentally, Roja frowned slightly, grabbed the man on the control position of the main gun, and the 2 disappeared in place. After dozens of seconds, Roja reappeared in the main control room, recalled the appearance of the main gunner a little, and began to seal. Transfiguration. Along with a puff of white smoke, Roja had turned into the appearance of the main gunner, and immediately sat on the main gun control position and began to think about the information he had just obtained. The two heavenly dragons in the main control room did not know that the Navy appeared, nor did they know that they would face the trial of the Supreme Court when they went back, so all their thinking remained on the original plan. According to the original plan, after assisting the Navy in annihilating the Big Mom pirates, the Platinum battleship will re-enter the invisible state, all the way back to the bottom of Mary Joa, where they will hand over all ordinary personnel to the corresponding ship, and then the Platinum battleship it will be controlled by 3 Tianlong people and will be stored in the warehouse. The Tianlong family stored a large amount of weapons and equipment plundered from Uranus in that warehouse, accounting for more than 80% of the total, and all the powerful weapons, such as Platinum battleships, where heavy the equipment is also stored there. Most of the remaining 20% are small weapons, carried by various Tianlong people. It is worth mentioning that in the hands of Costello, the head of the 5 Old Stars, he also has a high-level weapon. It seems that Saint Roswald doesn't know enough. Roja frowned slightly. Regarding the weapon warehouse, Roja has already heard from Roswald Saint, and this time this weapons warehouse is one of Roja's main targets, but the information provided by Roswald Saint is not so detailed, and he didn't even mention the weapon in Costello's hands. It's still a little bit lacking. Roja thought for a moment, and already understood the reason. It is impossible for Saint Roswald to betray, so the reason for the lack of intelligence can only be that the rise of Saint Roswald is too fast, and there is no time to get in touch with the true core of the Tianlong people. After all, before Roja manipulated Saint Roswald, the Roswald family was a fringe family that did not even have a Dragonite senator. If it weren't for Roja's strong support, he tilted the huge resources to supply Saint Roswald, I am afraid that he would not be able to become a member of parliament until he died of old age. But it doesn't matter, as long as I enter Oranos, everything will be settled. Roja hooked the corner of his mouth, and immediately closed his eyes and began to rest. Even if St. Evans and others came back, there was no desire to get up. The main gun was destroyed, and he, the main gunner, had nothing to do at all, and he would not be disgusting by staying still. 7 days have passed in a flash, during which Roja brainwashed some key personnel, including the sensible St. Evans. It is worth mentioning that although the Heavenly Dragon Council sent a notice to the Supreme Court, it did not change the action plan, but asked St. Evans and others to return the Platinum battleship and then rush back to Mary Joa. Upon hearing this news, Roja was also relieved. It was the best to avoid trouble. Immediately, he stayed on the ship quietly until a large number of people left, and the Platinum battleship arrived in the warehouse under the control of 3 Tianlong people. Peripheral. It was a cliff on the red soil continent. There were countless reefs in the surrounding waters. Under the control of the system, the Platinum battleship showed the flexibility that should never belong to such a giant battleship. I hit the cliff and hit it straight. At the moment of passing through the illusory wall, Roja's heart tightened, as if he had passed through some kind of diaphragm, and came to another space. Closing his eyes to perceive, Roja's brows stretched out, and there was a relaxed look between his brows. The momentary movement that could not be used to Uranus before was finally used. After taking away the 4th road sign historical text, Roja once tried to use teleportation to return to Oranos, but he failed. The unfavorable teleportation failed for the first time, which surprised Roja. After more than a dozen attempts, Roja finally learned a result, that is, within the range of nearly 100 kilometers around Oranos, there is something that blocks his teleportation, making him unable to even marry Joa. Near. Don't think about it, you also know that this must be the response of the world government after losing the historical text of the road sign. But Roja at the time didn't know what made the teleportation invalid, so he was very depressed. Chapter 370 Space Anchor, Miller. The inability to move instantaneously means that there is only one way to attack, but the hidden power of the world government is completely unknown, and the defensive ability and monitoring ability of the mysterious battleship are also classified, so it is impossible to attack at all, and Roja can only put the exploration of Oranos on hold. Until Roja discovered Kronos in Ralph Drew and learned about the existence of the space anchor from Kronos Intelligence Library. The space anchor, one of the standard configurations of Oranos, can lock the space within 1 kilometer to 10,000 kilometers outside the battleship when it is used at full capacity, so that enemy ships within this space cannot use space jumping. Although it is said that this time the world government only opened the lowest level space anchor because of energy saving, but it also successfully blocked Roja. Until now, Roja's teleportation can only be resumed when he is within 1 kilometer of Oranos. Of course, he can only use it within 1 kilometer of Oranos. If you want to cross the long space blockade area, you still need to use the rest. Method. When Roja sensed the dimensional anchor, the 3 Tianlong people stood up one after another and walked outside the cabin. After following the 3 Tianlong people out of the cabin, Roja really saw the so-called weapons warehouse. Looking around, there are nearly 1,000 technological weapons of different types and sizes in a huge space of more than 777 square kilometers. All kinds of tricks, everything. Looking at these weapons, Roja's eyes couldn't help but heat up. These are all powerful weapons in Oranos, such as the heavy-duty carrier-based machine guns that shred the naval battleships on the Platinum battleship. Here, they are only the lowest level of existence. Energy weapons are the main weapons of Oranos across the universe. Just as Roja was excitedly looking at the sci-fi weapons that he had only seen in movies, the voice of the Tianlong people came from behind. This is the warehouse where the weapons of the gods are stored. It's spectacular. That's natural. The things stored here are the foundation of our Tianlong people, not those disobedient navies. My lord, according to the stay time given by the council, we still have 30 minutes, can we go and have a look, but remember, don't move around, every weapon here is connected to an alarm, without the identity proof of more than half of the Tianlong people, anyone who touches the weapon is considered an intruder. Understand, understand. Watching the 3 heavenly dragons turn around in the warehouse, Roja withdrew his hand in embarrassment. Connected to the alarm, cannot touch. Hearing this, Roja couldn't help feeling depressed. It was like the wedding night. When the wine was over for 3 rounds, the atmosphere on both sides was strong. The groom's prelude was finished. A touch of red. Pit father. Glancing at the dazzling array of weapons around, Roja couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. When you leave, we'll pack it all into the storage space for you. If you can't fit it in, it will blow up. Not even a scum is left for the Tianlong people. Looking at the surroundings reluctantly again, Roja stepped forward slightly, the figure disappeared in place, and when he reappeared, he had already appeared in a dilapidated room. Taking out the map given by Russell in Kronos, Roja recognized the direction and disappeared into the room again. A few minutes later, Roja finally arrived at the target location. A small room with only a few dozen square meters, and in this room, there are 2 exquisite cultivation tanks. One of the cultivation tanks was wide open, and there was nothing in it, while in the other cultivation tank, this man with a broken body was floating. Rao was already prepared in his heart, but Roja still inevitably raised his eyebrows, and a shocked look appeared in his eyes. Actually, as Russell said, there are still aliens from the original D family alive. In other words, this person has lived for nearly 10,000 years. Miller, Captain. Roja hooked the corner of his mouth, pressed his palm lightly on the cultivation tank, and stared at the man whose eyes were closed as if he had died. Russell, let me say hello to you and let me tell you a word. The dawn is coming, and the night will eventually pass away. He wants you to be the dawn of the dawn, clear of rebellion. Roja muttered to himself at the cultivation tank, seeing the domineering arrogance that always shrouded Miller in the cultivation tank. However, there was no reaction at all. Dead. Roja tilted his head, as if remembering something, he lowered his head and groped in his arms. After a while, he took out a crystal sign, raised his head, and planned to stick it on the cultivation tank. Boom! A pair of eyes. One hand appeared by the cultivation tank. The man with a broken body, his eyes widened, staring at the crystal sign in Roja's hand. Eyes are bloodshot. Guru, Guru, Guru. Miller in the culture tank wanted to speak, but as soon as he opened his mouth, the culture fluid poured into his throat, and the sound turned into a series of bubbles. After being choked for a few times, Miller came to his senses, took out a piece of metal from the side, and stuck it to his throat. The next moment, a hoarse and magnetic voice came from the loudspeaker next to the cultivation tank. Who are you? Where's Russell? How is he? What year is it? What about those bastards? And, looking at the excited man in front of him, Roja couldn't help but feel a little admiration in his heart. It is this person, with a whole ship of companions, who is looking for a new home in the vast universe. It is also this person who, for decades, has encouraged his companions to survive on a dead moon. It is also him who, after coming to the ground, helped lead the progress of mankind, and even turned against some extreme companions, just to protect mankind. 900 years ago, because of Russell's words, he dragged his broken body and waited until now. And now, he finally got the person he wanted to see. Captain, take your time, your body can't stand such agitation. Roja watched the other side lose half of his skull, only a layer of film was left, his brain that couldn't stop fluctuating, could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth, comforting other side. Hearing Roja's words, Miller finally remembered the state of his body, closed his eyes, took a few deep breaths, and calmed the excited emotions in his heart. After a while, Miller opened his eyes again, and looked at Roja with eyes full of wisdom and maturity. Now, tell me, everything. Chapter 371 Ordinary Girl, Joe Elibani. After a long time, Roja's narrative finally ended. Miller in the incubation tank, floating on his back in the culture medium, his face was flat, his eyes were staring straight at the white ceiling, and he didn't know what he was thinking. It wasn't until 10 minutes later that Miller slowly turned around and floated right in front of Roja. Tell me, what do you need me to do? Speaking of formality, Miller's angular face was full of seriousness, and a faint power radiated from him. Roja, who knows Miller's details, naturally knows that this is not the power brought by Miller's strength, but the aura that has been in the top position for a long time and has been nurtured for many years. As long as you can control Uranos, then I can solve the rest. Roja looked at Miller expectantly. However, to Roja's surprise, Miller shook his head. I can't do it. Seeing Roja's suspicious eyes, Miller explained lightly. It turned out that after Russell's death, the position of vice captain on the ship had been automatically extended downwards. And the person who Shunyan is naturally a member of the Tianlong people. With the identity of the deputy captain, the Tianlong people not only opened the room where Miller was, but also smoothly traveled to and from all places in Uranos, including the bridge, and completely controlled Uranos. Because of my current physical condition, the system has determined that I am seriously injured and cannot continue to operate the battleship. Most of the control has been handed over to the deputy captain, unless I can reach the bridge. Otherwise, I can't compete with them for control. Miller said flatly. Immediately looking at his body, Miller's resolute face showed a rare hint of bitterness. In my current state, even if I leave the cultivation tank, I am afraid I will not live to the moment when I reach the bridge. After finishing speaking, Miller saw Roja's frowning brows and suddenly laughed. I'm sorry, I haven't seen anyone for too long. So I just want to talk more and make fun of you. Seeing Roja's speechless appearance, Miller laughed even happier. After a full half of a sound, he waved his hand and stopped laughing. Leaning on the edge of the container of the culture tank, Miller stretched out a finger and said lightly, I can stop the battleship for a minute, is that enough? Enough. Roja nodded without hesitation. 1 minute is enough for Kronos to rush in and destroy Uranos. The two discussed some specific matters again, during which Miller pointed at the crystal sign in Roja's hand, and Miller's two-dimensional image suddenly appeared on it. I gave you some permissions, and through this, you will be able to contact me directly, and pay attention, if my image on the top turns red, it means I am dead, Miller said lightly. Understood, then I'll go first, and I'll pick you up within a few seconds of you stopping Uranus. Roja nodded to Miller. Everything went well. Miller nodded. Everything went well. Roja left the room and walked outside of Uranus. When he came to the weapons warehouse, he rudely put everything into his portable storage space. With the authorization of Captain Miller and the setting of the mere Tianlong people, how could it be possible to stop Roja? It was not until half an hour later that Roja, who had searched the entire warehouse, walked towards the outside with satisfaction, all the way, unimpeded. Just as Roja left Uranus and rushed to the Seven Waters, Miller in Uranus floated in the cultivation tank, looking up at the ceiling, but the corners of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. It's all over. Roja, who returned to the Seven Waters, threw a large number of weapons into the laboratory and ordered them to assemble the androids as soon as possible, and then left directly. Roja did not choose to go home directly, but turned into a middle-aged uncle and wandered on the street. He wanted to enjoy a rare leisure time. The war in the New World has ended for a week, the enthusiasm of the world's discussion has gradually subsided, and everything has returned to peace. The world is so good at forgetting. Oh yes, there's one more thing that's been making waves. The Admiral Fujitora, who was originally judged dead, suddenly appeared at the scene when the Navy held a memorial service for him, which made the Navy embarrassed. In addition, there is really nothing for the people of the Seven Waters to discuss. A few people are discussing that war, and they all have the name of the Dimension Brigade on their lips. If the Dimensional Brigade goes, how can so many people die, and the battle will end in a few seconds? If the Dimensional Brigade really goes, there is no need to fight at all. When a few adults fight there, BIGMOM should surrender. The people of the Seven Waters seem to have endless love and blind obedience to the Dimension Brigade. In their mouths, the Dimension Brigade has become an omnipotent existence. Standing on the side of the street and listening to the conversations of passers-by for a while, Roja smiled faintly and continued to stroll on the street. Ellipsis 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 ellipsis. 9 flowers. I went to the theme bar that I used to go to with Monet Sugar. What surprised Roja was that, unlike those bars that were constantly updated with the release of new comics, the theme of this bar was still the Holy Grail War. After chatting with the enchanting waitress for a while, Roja realized that the owner of this bar was robbed by pirates when he went out to sea more than half a year ago, and it was Arturia who passed by who saved his life and saved him just now. Since then, this bar has been the exclusive theme bar of the Holy Grail War. After smiling for a while and enjoying the lively atmosphere of the bar, Roja drank all the wine in the cup and walked slowly towards the center of the Seven Waters. It has now developed into the world's largest comic exhibition gathering place, and more than a dozen comic memorial halls have been built, and tens of thousands of people come and go here every day. I admired the stone statues of many cartoon characters for a while, and then read the stories written by many readers spontaneously. I felt that their brains were so big. Roja finally sat on the chair on the edge of the square, enjoying the breeze blowing and quiet. Looking at the town below quietly, a sense of fulfillment rose in my heart. This is his favorite city. Thump. Just as Roja was enjoying the silence, a sound suddenly came from beside him. Turning his head to look, he saw a girl with shoulder-length pink hair and a beautiful face sitting beside him. This person. Joelle Bonnie. Roja recognized the identity of the other party at a glance. It was the supernova of the same period as Luffy, Joelle Bonnie, known as the Big Stomach Girl. How did this guy show up here? Also, dressed like the girl next door. Hey, uncle, even if I'm pretty, you don't have to look at me like that all the time, right? Just in time to see Joelle Bonnie looking at him with an unhappy face, her cheeks bulging, which was extraordinarily cute. I'm sorry. Roja apologized with a smile, got up and left. Before leaving, he also glanced at Joelle Bonnie and shook his head with a light smile. Another person's fate was changed by him. Today's Joelle Bonnie has no sense of power in her body, she is completely an ordinary girl who loves comics. However, that's fine too, isn't it? Roja's eyes showed brilliance, and he walked towards the house step by step. Leisure time is over and it's time to end it all. Chapter 372 Dishonest Warring States. Naval Headquarters, Marin Vando. It was late at night, and the Warring States were walking in a spacious walk, with a slow pace. He had just hosted Recollections, and he was walking while thinking about whether there were any omissions in the proposal of the meeting just now. At this time, it has been a month since the Battle of the Kingdom of Provence. During this time, the Navy used countless resources to publicize the glorious results of this battle, hoping to restore the people who were declining among the people. Influence. For this reason, the Navy even concealed some of the losses and made the record more attractive. Although the effect is much different from what the Navy imagined, it still has some effect. It is really too difficult to really want to bring the status of the Navy back to its former position, and it will be a long tug of war. And, in a situation where no one is targeting the Navy. Thinking of this, the secret information that appeared some time ago appeared in Sengoku's mind. Near the capital of Seven Waters, there are a large number of unknown battleships assembled with uniform specifications and unknown flags. Someone once stood above the battleship and saw warriors in black armor, suspected to be subordinate warriors of the Dimensional Brigade. Which unlucky ghost is the one who provoked the Dimensional Brigade and deserves such a big fight? Warring States smiled bitterly, and said in his heart with self-deprecation. In this world, there are not many forces worthy of the Dimensional Brigade. The Whitebeard pirates are one, the United Kingdom with the support of the Revolutionary Army behind the scenes is one, the Revolutionary Army is half, and the rest are some small fish, that's it. Of course, there is one last choice. Warring States has always restrained himself from thinking about it, but the name still appeared in his mind and lingered. That is, the world government. The forces that are truly worthy of the Dimension Brigade's fighting, the world government is definitely in the first place. Thinking of the possibility of facing the Dimensional Brigade, the Warring States' mood became heavier. With the Navy alone, it is impossible to fight against that monster group. Perhaps, coupled with the hidden power of the world government and the Tianlong people, they can still fight for it, but even so, the Warring States period maintained a pessimistic attitude towards the outcome of the real war. If it really wants to fight, the power of the world government may be weakened to the lowest level in 800 years. I hope the Dimensional Brigade remains stable. Warring States shook his head with a wry smile. At this time, he didn't know that the hidden power that he had high hopes for had been taken away by Roja. After walking up 2 floors and turning a few corners, the door of his office finally appeared in the sight of Warring States. That's right, even if it was late at night, Sengoku still had to continue to work, and would not sleep on the sofa in the office until he was exhausted. And he has been in this state for a long time. The first proficient job seems to be to cope with Detective Conan. As soon as he thought of that terrifying cartoon, Sengoku couldn't help spit, and a depressed look appeared on his face. That damned manga, which is still serialized to this day, has emerged in an endless stream of novel methods of killing, and has taught a large number of ordinary people who are powerless but harbor deep hatred, and the number of deaths of nobles is increasing day by day. I really hope Conan ends sooner, Sengoku muttered to himself, pushing open the door of the office. He habitually turned on the light, and the next moment Warring States could not help but froze in place, his muscles tightened, and he instantly entered a state of battle. There is someone in the office. A slender man in a black trench coat was standing by the window with his back to him, not knowing whether he was admiring the night view of Marin Vadodar or the bright moon in the sky. Looking at the back of the other party, a familiar feeling rose in Zongguo's heart, but this did not mean that he allowed others to gently close the door without consent, and a faint power was brewing on him. General Warring States, long time no see, you work really hard. As if hearing the sound of the door closing, the man turned around slowly, revealing a face that Sengoku would dream of in his dreams. Roja, Sengoku frowned, staring at Roha with a solemn expression. What are you doing here? Seeing the nervousness of the Warring States period, Roha smiled faintly, and immediately reached the sofa by the window, spreading his hands towards the opposite side. Sengoku was stunned for a moment, then came over and sat opposite Roha. From the beginning to the end, his eyes did not leave Roha, and his brain was madly thinking about the purpose of Roha's trip. Old One-Eyed, Khan. Roha slowly said a name. Warring States' pupils shrank, the momentum on his body suddenly became chaotic, and the slightest killing intent rose in his heart. Roha didn't seem to feel the change in the Warring States, and was still talking to himself, saying the names of one person after another. Frankham, Lesta, Moran, Grizzlies, Katak. Marin Fando on March 15, Shihai Mosaic Kingdom on April 8, New World G5 Branch on May 3, and East Sea Goa Kingdom on May 9. Every time Roha uttered a name, the look of shock on Sengoku's face became stronger. However, when Roha said the dates and locations, the momentum of Sengoku suddenly dropped, until at the end, the whole person folded his arms, leaning on the chair. He looked at Roha with a gloomy face. August 4th Beihai. Enough. What the hell are you doing? Sengoku could no longer bear the secrets being revealed one by one, and interrupted Roha unceremoniously, staring at Roha's eyes, but there was a trace behind him. Cold sweat. These people, these places, and these times were simply too familiar to him. Because those people have been gathered into his subordinates for many years in the Warring States period and belong to his personal subordinates completely, and those time and places are the time and place of these subordinates performing their tasks. Angry, or scared. 2.8 Luoya smiled and looked into the eyes of the Warring States. His face was gentle, but the words he spit out were like a sharp sword, poking in the heart of the Warring States. General of the Warring States, even if it is me, I am completely before learning about these things. I didn't expect you to do so much for the people. Gathering the former subordinates, secretly leaving behind the soldiers who were wronged by the nobles and expelled from the navy, although only a few to a dozen people join each year, but over the years, they have accumulated as many as 100. And, the most important thing is that without exception, these people are all strong in the navy. The weakest one also has the strength of the major of the headquarters, and the strongest one, I think about it, it seems to be your former deputy. Captain, although I have stepped down from the quasi-admiral level due to injuries and age, it seems that it is not a problem to solve a lieutenant general of the headquarters alone. Chapter 373 Biggest Traitor. And what did these people do? Attacked the noble slave fleet, rescued the family of the leader of the fallen regime from the imperial army under the world government, delayed the orders of the Tianlong people, interfered with their voyage, investigated the hidden forces of the world government, followed and followed. Members of CP0, CP9. Roha looked at the sweaty Warring States with a smile on his face. Although these things are all about saving the reputation of the Navy and the world government and saving ordinary people, in fact, they seem to have offended many nobles. Prophet. Roha raised his eyebrows and looked at the dignified Sengoku with a mocking look on his face. Marshal of the Warring States period, do you think that if you put these things in front of the 5 old stars, or even the Tianlong people, they can still allow a restless person to continue to serve as the admiral of the navy and run the world's largest military organization for them? Is it? Hearing this, the Warring States frowned, and the next moment, he was relieved, and the expression on his face actually appeared. Smile. As the Dimension Brigade still going to attack the world government? The Warring States thought while looking at Roha and said, "Oh wait, you came to me, not to threaten me at all, but for something else, right? Say it. You, no, what does the Dimensional Brigade want me, the enemy's marshal, for? No, don't talk, let me guess." Sengoku suddenly stretched out his hand to stop Roha from continuing to speak, and immediately began to ponder. However, this time Sengoku's meditation lasted for half an hour, during which he kept standing up, sitting down, looking at Roha from time to time, hesitating to say anything, until finally, when Sengoku stopped his uneasy mood, he took out a bottle of wine that seemed to be treasured for a long time from the cabinet in the corner of the office. Without inviting Roha, and without showing any sense of rarity, Sengoku rudely cut off the mouth of the bottle with his bare hands, and poured the wine into his throat with a big mouth. Without tasting it, he simply wanted to use alcohol to numb himself and calm the fluctuations in his heart. It wasn't until he drank half of the bottle of wine in one breath that Sengoku sat back opposite Roha, slammed the bottle on the table, leaned the bottle in his right hand, and stared deeply at Roha. In the process, Roha has been sitting on the sofa indifferently, watching the behavior of the warring states, without any unexpected look on his face. After a full half of a sound, the warring states stared at Roha and said, "You really want to do this? Aren't you afraid that the world government will perish with you? And, most importantly, what's in it for you? Clever." A look of admiration appeared on Roha's face. As expected of the warring states known as wise generals, if he were an ordinary person, he would have been immersed in the fear of secret exposure, but the warring states did not. He directly grasped the essence of the matter. Saw through Roha's purpose. "We hope to build an ideal world, no more wars in every corner of the world, no more riots. We want to enrich the lives of all people, and make every city in the world become what it is today. The appearance of the capital of Ushui, is this enough?" Roha stated lightly. While he was speaking, Sengoku closed his eyes and listened to every word Roha said. Yin. 7 waters. Even if the warring states period has not been there for a long time, but through the intelligence department, he has learned about every change there, and even said that in his intelligence database, there is a special room for storing information about the 7 waters. Information about that Dimension Brigade base camp. It was the most prosperous, richest, most spectacular city in the world, and at the same time the most peaceful city. The life of the people there is far better than that of any city under the banner of world conquest, including even Mary Joa, known as the Holy Land. Marshal of the warring states period, what are you still hesitating about? You have done so many things. Didn't you just want to maintain the justice in your heart and to win a better life for people all over the world? Now, a perfect opportunity to put in front of you, and you only need to provide us with a small help. Roha spoke slowly, his voice full of temptation, like a demon's whisper, ringing in Sengoku's ears. I am. The Navy, Sengoku said with some difficulty, with a struggling look on his face. What about the Navy? The Navy may have served those 20 kings 800 years ago, but now, I think the Navy should serve justice, not the dragon people who claim to be the most honorable people in the world. The lackey. Sengoku didn't answer. The expression on his face became more and more struggling. He knew what Roha meant, and he knew more about the degeneration of the world government today, but he still couldn't pass the level in his mind. That level is called loyalty. However, at this time, on the balance in the heart of the warring states period, the weight called justice is slowly sinking, and the weight called loyalty is about to lose its weight. I don't know how long it took before Zhongguo slowly raised his head. At this time, his eyes were bloodshot, his face was pale, and he opened his mouth, and Zhongguo's hoarse voice echoed in the office. How sure are you? How can you be sure that you can actually build the world you speak of? Done. Luoya smiled lightly and said, I'm 100% sure. The reason why I came to you is because I don't want to see tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of righteous navies die for those idiots. As for the world I'm talking about, isn't the United Nations in the South China Sea an example? Sengoku looked at Roha with an unexpected look and nodded silently. Sure enough, the newly emerging United Nations in the South China Sea is supported by the Dimension Brigade. I am afraid that the so-called Revolutionary Army is just a cover, or the Revolutionary Army has reached some kind of agreement with the Dimension Brigade. Sengoku is not at all surprised that two organizations that want to build a new world have reached such an agreement. Aren't you afraid to tell me everything so I can fight back? Sengoku suddenly asked. What do you think? Roha asked back with a smile. Hearing this, Zhongguo's expression froze, and then he shook his head bitterly. 703. Indeed, with the Dimensional Brigade's long-standing behavior, it is impossible to do such a thing without complete certainty. In other words, the Dimensional Brigade is completely sure that if he chooses to help the world government, he will challenge the Navy and the army of Mary Joa at the same time. The difference in strength is too great. 2 hours, from Marinvando to Mary Joa, the fastest will be 6 hours. I will delay you for another 2 hours. If you can't end the battle by then. Not so. Roja smiled and waved his hand. These times are enough. Sengoku raised his eyebrows, smiled bitterly, and immediately began to express his request. Since the Dimensional Brigade intends to build a new world, the Warring States period will naturally win the benefits for the Navy and the people. And Roja, naturally, said the belly draft that was already prepared. A few hours later, the two completely ended the discussion. Roja looked satisfied, while Sengoku was a bit bitter in the satisfaction. No matter what the purpose, the process, or the result, he, the Admiral of the Navy, will bear the final infamy. But if it's for the new world, he willing to do so. Then, in order to meet the new world, Roja stretched out his hand. Welcome to the new world. Sengoku also stretched out his hand. Since then, the pattern of the new world has been determined in this marshal's office. Chapter 374 The End of the Don Quixote Family. The world suddenly fell silent. The pirates of the New World stopped their activities, and the Whitebeard pirates began to gather their fleet. The war in the South China Sea suddenly stopped, and the many kingdoms that had been suppressed by the United Kingdom for a long time and were breathless finally got a chance to breathe. The members of the Revolutionary Army who were inciting the people everywhere suddenly disappeared without a trace, and even an army that was ready to start a rebellion was suddenly disbanded, and there was no trace of anyone. At the entrances of the Great Route, there is suddenly no scene of pirates rushing into the Great Route, as if there are floods and beasts waiting for them on the Great Route. In short, in this short period of time, the whole world fell into a strange peace. Everyone hid in the place they thought was the safest, looking at the city in the first half of the Great Route, trembling. That city is called the capital of Seven Waters. Its ruler is named Dimension Brigade. The world-recognized Dimensional Brigade that can rival the world government. And now, this force that has always been invisible, has finally begun to show its fangs. Dozens of warships that the world has never seen before, and are made of unknown steel, are docking at the port of the Seven Waters. Just by looking at these steel battleships, the pirates felt their legs go weak and could not wait to escape to the horizon. With a length of 100 meters and a volume of up to 40 meters, it can be called a behemoth, and an ordinary pirate ship is only 1/3 the size of it. Dozens of huge and ferocious muzzles, under the sunlight, exudes a black luster, far exceeding the weapon technology of the pirate world, giving it the firepower that a single ship can destroy a town. The metal armor covering the entire ship, although slowing down its speed, has a strong defensive capability. Of course, the real power of these battleships is still the nearly 1,000 cyborgs in silver and black armor. They were authorized by Roja to use the technological weapons brought from Uranos. Under the circumstances, even Roja would have a headache. Seeing these huge battleships assembled in the capital of Seven Waters, everyone's hearts were raised. What is the Dimension Brigade going to do? Where did these warships come from? Who is the new target of the Dimension Brigade? What is their way forward? If you accidentally block the road, will it be bombed into debris? All kinds of questions appeared in everyone's mind, and the Skynet forum in the Seven Waters had already been boiling, and everyone was discussing the purpose of the Dimensional Brigade. Hold the grass. Hold the grass. 8 more ships came today, and now there are 47 ships. What are you doing? Destroying the world. 47 battleships. How can there be anything strange? The Navy sent nearly 1,000 ships to crusade against BIGMOM some time ago. Sabi upstairs, no explanation. Upstairs. The second floor is either a bum, or a rookie who has just come to the Seven Waters. The identification has been completed. Don't bully people upstairs. They just came to the capital of Seven Waters. They don't understand anything, and they didn't go to the port to see the market. It's normal. Understand, everyone should work together and isolate him. Hey, who do you think the Dimension Brigade's target is this time? I think it's Whitebeard. The red hair in the Four Emperors seems to have some friendship with the Dimensional Brigade, so there is only Whitebeard left. Hey, overwhelm the world's strongest man. Isn't that Dimension Brigade the world's strongest? PFF, do you see that there are still people talking about the strongest man in the world, with the Whitebeard? It's already outdated. If nothing else, Boss Gilgamesh, one person can chop off the Whitebeard. Why don't I feel like I'm going to fight Whitebeard? The Dimension Brigade has never mobilized so many warships. Even if it's fighting Kaido, it's just a few cadres. Could it be to fight the world government? It's good to fight the world government. I have long been disliked by the Tianlong people. The rule of the Dimensional Brigade is 10,000 times better than that of the Tianlong people. Although what the upstairs said is very reasonable, I still want to remind you, be careful that the agents of the world government come to you. Afraid of an egg. I live on Queen Street, and the agent Roja lives next door to me. How dare they do it? I wipe, local tyrants appear. Show off your wealth naked. Quote. What people in the forum discussions don't know is that every word they say will be recorded by dozens of people belonging to different forces and spread around the world as intelligence. At this moment, in the Holy Land Mary Joa, there are also a group of people, sitting in a gorgeous auditorium, watching the information from the Seven Waters. There are a lot of people, dozens of people. These people were uniformly dressed in gorgeous white robes and bubble head hoods. Their faces were impatient, and they looked arrogant. Sir Roswald, you use the only one-time summoning order for the entire clan as a member of parliament just to show us the conversations of those pariahs. On a row of luxurious seats at the front of the auditorium, a man with a beard and hair, the all-white old man, leaning on crutches, rudely questioned Saint Roswald standing on the stage. His words, like a fuse, immediately aroused everyone's dissatisfaction, and condemned one after another. Is it such a big thing that I have to call everyone over and let us watch the screen? I've been sitting here for half an hour. If you don't get to the point, I'll leave. That is, all the slaves have been driven away, and there is no one to serve. How can I sit here? I want to go back. This time, people with some status from various families have come here. There is still a young son in my family who is not taken care of. Those clumsy guys won't do it at all. In the face of everyone's condemnation, Saint Roswald has been apologizing with a smile on the stage, and kept delaying with various words, and the restraint is really good. After delaying for a few more minutes, behind the curtain, one tall and one short suddenly walked out, two men in black robes with hoods covering their faces. Seeing this man, Saint Roswald suddenly stopped bowing, his face turned cold, and he nodded to the man beside him. Are you all ready? It's over, you can go, the sooner the better. I see. After a few words of extremely fast conversation, Saint Roswald hurriedly left the high platform and walked out from the back door of the auditorium. On the street at the back door, three strangely shaped carriages were standing at this time. It is said that the shape is strange, because his chassis is too low, and the length is 5 meters, and there are 2 pairs of wheels on both sides. Without hesitation, Saint Roswald hurried into the carriage. In the car, a bald-headed man with all the muscles and knots, nodded coldly to him, and immediately closed the door. The next moment, the carriage suddenly broke away from the reins, a row of metal pipes appeared behind it, and there was a faint flame rising. Sit down, the big man reminded coldly. In the next second, a slender column of fire suddenly shot out from the row of pipes, and the carriage without horses rushed towards the gate of Maryjoy at an astonishing speed. Although he was well prepared, Saint Roswald was brought down by the sudden inertia and slammed into the back wall of the carriage. He only regained his senses after a while, so he had the opportunity to observe the surroundings. At this time, on the street, 3 cars were speeding, and the Tianlong people were surrounded by onlookers. Even if the city defense army occasionally appeared, they would be suppressed by the sudden burst of powerful fire from the front car, and they dared not probe. Looking back at the last carriage, St. Roswald had a complicated look on his face. Because in that carriage, there were some people who had been unconscious by their leader. Among them, there are bald old men who practice physical skills, and there are burly men with baby voices. Each of them is a strong man. On the outside, they have a unified name. Don Quixote Family. Chapter 375 Pillars of Fire on the Red Land. On the island that was smashed to pieces, a blond man covered in blood was lying on the ground, looking straight at the man sitting beside him. Even though he couldn't move at this time, the arrogant expression on his face didn't change at all. "It's a crazy plan, you are the real lunatic." The blond man spoke slowly, a trace of blood running down the corner of his mouth. Was it a weak cough that made his face even paler? "So, you agreed." The black-haired man with a gentle smile on his face all the time, looked at each other with a light smile. "Do I still have a choice now?" A mocking look appeared in the eyes of the blond man, but he was not mocking the other party, but himself. Laughing at their recklessness, laughing at their seemingly good, but actually weak and messy strength, laughing at their tragic life. "If you say that I am willing to be imprisoned for life by you, can you change the conditions?" The blond man said suddenly. The black-haired man stared at each other deeply, and then shook his head with a dull expression. "Brother Doflamingo, I know what kind of person you are better than you, so I won't give you a chance." Roja said coldly. "Either you will die in a few months, or you will die. I'll die now, there is no third option." Quote. Although he had expected 187, Doflamingo's heart sank, and the whole person fell silent. A few minutes later, after a long sigh, I suddenly remembered, and immediately Doflamingo's face showed a complicated look, which included loneliness and unwillingness, as well as madness and bitterness. "Look. I agree. I didn't expect that I ended up living so long for someone else. However, it is finally over." On the high platform of the Tianlongren Auditorium, a tall man in a robe slowly lifted his hood, revealing a rebellious face and dazzling blonde hair. When seeing this person, there were a series of high exclamations among the Tianlong people who had started to criticize them because of St. Roswald's bid farewell. If there is any pirate other than the four emperors that can be remembered by the Tianlong people, there is only this man in front of him. Don Quixote Doflamingo. Shame of the dragons. This group of rubbish has not been seen for so many years, and it is still so noisy. A hideous smile appeared on Doflamingo's face, and the next moment, invisible silk threads swept all around, blood spurted out, and mourning all over the place. After just a few seconds, no one made a sound in the entire auditorium. Blood flowed, debris was everywhere, and the disgusting smell filled the auditorium. Smelling this smell, he had been standing behind Doflamingo, leaning on the short man against the wall and lifted his hood, revealing a head of white hair. I didn't see any movement from him. The next moment, a hurricane rose for no reason in the auditorium, and all the smell was blown away in an instant and blown onto the street outside. Brother Doflaming, who was taking a deep breath and enjoying the thrill of slaughtering the Tianlong people, couldn't help but stop for a while, and his face showed an unhappy look. "Hey, Accelerator, is it really good to disturb other people's interest like this?" Brother Doflamingo turned his head unceremoniously, looking at Accelerator unhappily. "Zagu, dying people, what are you interested in?" Accelerator said sarcastically. "I just want to enjoy it when I'm about to die." Brother Doflaming didn't mind Accelerator's sarcasm, but stretched his waist and asked, "Don't you have to go? You're going to die. Those things you buried can't hurt me, and I have to stay." Although Accelerator didn't say it clearly, Doflamingo understood what he meant. Even if it is hard to resist the explosion, Accelerator will stay and confirm that Doflamingo died in front of him. "It's really watertight." Brother Doflaming shook his head, and immediately stretched out his hand. The white lines condensed, and then he rose into the sky. Birdcage. At the moment when Doflamingo released his ability, 3 black shadows rose into the sky in the very center of Mary Joa, and a terrifying aura like an abyss suddenly spread out, covering the entire Mary Joa. Looking at the birdcage that enveloped the entire Mary Joa, Miyamoto Yuansai's expression turned cold, and sword energy erupted all over his body. Jung. The long sword was unsheathed and slashed out from top to bottom, and the sharp sword energy suddenly appeared, piercing the air, and flying towards the bird cage with layers of air waves. Boom! The deafening explosion sounded, but the bird cage did not shake, and it was still intact. What? This is a bird cage. Doflamingo is here. The 3 people in the sky exchanged messages in an instant. The next moment, Costello's pupils shrank, and he turned his head with a swish, looking in the direction of the Tianlongren auditorium. No, his target is the Tianlong people. Hearing this, the other 2 trembled, and the next moment they galloped towards the auditorium. But before they could feel it, they heard Doflamingo's high voice coming from the direction of the auditorium. Tan fu 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 fu, 5 old stars. Heavenly dragon people, holy land Mary Joa. It's worth it to be able to walk with you. The next second, Doflamingo was pierced by Miyamoto Yuansai, who suddenly appeared behind him. Let's go together. You think too much. Miyamoto Yuanjai laughed out loud. Pat. Suddenly, there was a sound of something falling to the ground. Miyamoto Yuansai looked down subconsciously, and there was a small metal square on the ground, and on one side of the square, a red button had been pressed. This is Costello, who rushed over, stretched out his hand to pick up the button in doubt, but at this moment, the roof under his feet suddenly fluctuated, and the next moment, a dazzling red light filled Costello's sight. Boom boom boom. Thunder-like explosions sounded from all over Mary Joa, and pillars of fire shot straight into the sky, breaking through the ground and mercilessly devouring the entire Mary Joa. A few seconds later, the entire Mary Joa was completely swallowed up by the pillar of fire and disappeared. A pillar of fire with a diameter of dozens of kilometers appeared at the top of Mary Joa, blazingly, connecting the heavens and the earth. Dynamite rock, all detonated. Chapter 376 Aokiji that welcomes fate. The red flames were blazing, and the fire was terrifying. The pillar of fire erupted from the center of Mary Joa, and instantly covered the surrounding area of hundreds of kilometers. In response, the pillar of fire was still expanding, and the scorching heat wave went straight to the sky, penetrating the sky and the earth. In between, the entire red soil continent caught cold. Hundreds of millions of living beings surrendered under the power of destroying the sky and the earth, looking at the flame pillar connecting the heaven and the earth, kneeling on the ground, shivering. People who don't really see such power will never understand the horror at that time. The temperature at the center of the pillar of fire was already inestimable, but the temperature was terrifying from the view of the trees a few kilometers away, which had not touched the pillar of fire, but began to scorch and burn. The entire crimson-red Earth continent seemed to be on fire. However, on a mountain peak dozens of kilometers away from the pillar of fire, the temperature did not change at all, but dropped a few degrees. It's spectacular. Roha exhaled a cold breath as his feet covered the solid ice of the mountain. Looking at the pillar of fire born in Mary Joa, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. The filth of the world, the goddamn heavenly dragons, is finally dead. I don't know how many 5 old stars are left. Better to be dead. Just when Roha was looking forward to the annihilation of the 5 old stars, a terrifying explosion suddenly sounded from a distance. That direction is Mary Joa. No, it should be the center of the pillar of fire. Subconsciously looking in the direction of the pillar of fire, I saw that in the middle of the pillar of fire in the distance, it suddenly began to fluctuate. Although the fluctuation of the range was only 100 meters, for the pillar of fire with a diameter of more than 100 kilometers and a height of 10,000 meters, it was just drizzle, but variation has indeed occurred. It's like someone is going to rush out. Boom. The next moment, along with a thunderous explosion, a black shadow suddenly broke through the fire column, and after staying in the Tianlong for a while, it flew straight in the direction of Roha. Seeing this, an android warrior guarding around Roha, as well as the powerhouses, all looked at them, and the atmosphere instantly became tense. "Don't move, my own." Roha waved his hand, signaling everyone not to be nervous, and then indifferently looked at the two figures flying from a distance. "That's right, there are two figures, but the other figure, who is flying, is holding his neck, and his whole body is soft, as if he has lost consciousness." Not long after, the two galloping in the sky finally came to the top of the frozen mountain, and everyone finally saw what they looked like. Master Accelerator. "Yo, one side. Come back, one side." Facing the warm welcome from everyone, Accelerator's face showed an awkward smile, and after nodding stiffly, he came to Roha with the person in his hand. Thump. He casually threw the dark man in his hand to the ground in front of Roha. "Just caught this one, and the remaining two were not found. They should not be dead." Yifeng Tongxing opened his mouth to report the situation. Roha raised his brows, and with a slight hook with his toes, turned the person on the ground over, and then he could see the appearance of the other party. "This person is Miyamoto Yuansai," Roha recalled in his mind before remembering the other party's name. It's not that Roha has a bad memory, it's really Miyamoto Yuansai at this time, it's really miserable. The clogs disappeared, and there were only a few tattered fabrics hanging on the body, and even the skin all over the body had been burnt to black. "I really can't recognize it, but the half-dead guy in front of him is actually Miyamoto Yuenjai, who is famous for his swordsmanship in the world and is one of the 5 old stars. Where's Doflamingo? Dead." After a question and answer, after confirming that Doflamingo was completely dead, Roha's heart inevitably fluctuated a little. Even if it was Doflamingo who he personally forced to death, it was inevitable to hear that this character he once liked died in an explosion. Cough, cough, cough. A sudden cough came from under his feet. Roha raised his brows, just in time to see Miyamoto Yuansai, lying on the ground coughing and panting violently. "Life is really hard, but it's useless," Roha thought sarcastically. As if finally regaining consciousness, Miyamoto Yuansai struggled to open his eyes, and the first thing that caught his eye was the condescending figure of Roha. As soon as he saw Roha Miyamoto Yuenjai, his pupils shrank, and he subconsciously stood up and ran away, but just as his hands reached the ground, he snorted and fell down again. Rao is that his strength has reached the level of a general, and he can't stand the impact of a large number of explosive rock explosions. In addition, he was rated by Accelerator in the column of fire. At this time, Miyamoto Yuenjai couldn't even stand up. After realizing his physical condition, Miyamoto Yuenjai was lying on the ground dejectedly, twisting his neck and looking around. When he saw Gilgamesh, Accelerator and other powerhouses standing beside Roha, as well as a large number of black-armored soldiers patrolling in the distance, an unbelievable look appeared on his face. You're not still." Miyamoto Yuansai pointed to Roha with his fingers trembling. "Assemble the army." Roha hooked his lips and shook his head lightly. "I never said that the fleet was used to attack Mary Joa, and you don't need the help of the fleet to fight you." "But, Being seriously injured and stimulated by Roha's words, Miyamoto Yuansai's breathing became more and more rapid, pointing at Roha and speechless. Suddenly, Miyamoto Yuansai's hand froze in the air, and after a few seconds, it slammed to the ground with a thud. The third 5-old star, Miyamoto Yuenjai, died. Glancing at Miyamoto Yuansai coldly, the body gradually lost its temperature. Roha squinted his eyes, and turned around and walked over. "Get rid of the body." Soon, an android warrior came over, dragged Miyamoto Yuansai's body, and walked towards the cliff on the other side of the mountain. He has ruled the world for decades, his strength surpassed that of generals, and he reached the top of the world, but his final result was nothing but a corpse thrown into the wilderness. Hearing the sound of the corpse falling to the cliff behind him, Roha did not look back, but looked at the huge pillar of fire in the distance and murmured in a low voice. "Next, Just wait for Uranus, just don't know when they will come out. By the way, what happened to the Navy? Roja turned to look at the android. The Navy has received the news of the mutation of Marijoya and is preparing to dispatch. However, due to unknown reasons, the port was destroyed. It is expected that it will take at least 1.5 to 2 hours before returning to the normal speed of departure. The android beside him immediately replied. 1.5 to 2 hours. Roja pondered slightly, and after a while, turned to look behind him. There was a man wearing a casual suit with a chill all over his body, standing there, looking at the fire pillar in the distance, silent. He was the one who froze the mountain at the foot of Roja and made a fireproof space for everyone. Former Admiral, Aokiji. It's your turn. Hearing Roja's call, Aokiji, who was as silent as an iceberg, slowly turned around, looked at Roja, nodded slowly, turned around and left without saying much. If Aokiji had doubts about Roja's plan before, then now, he has no doubts. The Holy Land Marijoa was destroyed, everything has gone to the unknown, the wheels of the new world have begun to roll, and he, today, will completely end his grudges in the old world. Final battle. It is also a battle of fate. Today the golden retriever at home has been busy for a long time, and is now coding the second chapter. But then again, my pair is a golden retriever, and 7 puppies were born. What's the matter with the white one? A good thing some Samoyed did. Close black lens bracket. Chapter 377 Port Explosion. Naval Headquarters, Marin Vando. This Marin Vando has already fallen into chaos. Of course it's not because of the pillar of fire at the top of the mainland, but because of the military port. Iota. Exploded. At the same moment when the headquarters was told of the destruction of Marijoa, the 3 military ports around Marin Vando rang out incessantly. The deafening sound of the explosion resounded throughout the island, and the sky-high fire was visible for hundreds of miles. The whole island trembled with the explosion. When the continuous explosion stopped, all the admirals and colonels who had rushed over were all stunned in place. Some people even had their legs weak and fell to their knees with a collapsed look on their faces. The 3 naval ports have always been the pride of Marin Vando. During the war, they could store nearly 200 warships to dock at the same time, and provide maintenance for dozens of warships at the same time. Its powerful efficiency tops the world. However, in less than 2 minutes, their pride has turned into an ugly ruin. How can this make them accept it? But fortunately, the time of the explosion happened to be Marin Vando's monthly military training parade. Except for the sailors on the observation deck, who fell into the water from the observation deck and suffered some injuries, there were no casualties. But these are not the most important. The most important thing is that there is a major incident in Marijoa now, and naval support is urgently needed. But now the 3 military ports have been scrapped, gravel reefs are all over the port, and several watchtowers at the exit have been blown down, and the horizontal bars are at the exit. In other words, the hundreds of warships in the 3 naval ports of the Navy were completely trapped in the naval ports and could not get out in a short period of time. Conspiracy. Definitely the man who attacked Marijoa. Look for it. The timing of the bomb detonation is too coincidental, that guy is definitely still around here. Yes. Find him quickly. Definitely catch the murderer. Everyone pay attention. Since the opponent dares to come here, he must not be weak. If he finds the enemy, he will immediately send out a signal bomb and wait for support. Whoever sees him must remember, don't kill him. There is still information to ask him. Yes, it's enough to fight half to death, and you must give him some breath. What's the matter? Dare to come to Marin Vando to bomb the military port? That bastard must be tired of living. Everyone try to act as a team, pay attention to safety. The crowd was furious, and thousands of navies immediately began to look for their companions on their ships, and immediately began to disperse around. In front of them, nearly 100 school officials and a dozen generals took the lead, turning into afterimages, rushing to every place where the murderer might be hidden. However, among the crowd, There were still some people standing in place without moving, walking around the ruins incessantly, looking contemplative, and from time to time some people left the port and ran to the side of the main building. There it is, the monitoring room. Their thinking is very simple. There is absolutely no one who can completely avoid all the surveillance at the military port. As long as the surveillance is called up, they will definitely be able to find out the prisoner's body and appearance, and even the traces of the prisoner. It's just that these people are destined to leave full of excitement and return lost. Because, all the monitoring has been manipulated by a person with a noble identity. And he was someone they could never have imagined. Standing at the top of the main building of the Navy headquarters, Warring States wore a Navy cloak and stared at the military port below with a complicated expression, and there was still a trace of distress in his pupils. 3 military ports, just ruined. The Warring States period sighed. The murderer must be Marin Fando. Akainu shouted fiercely behind him, a faint heat rising from his body. Akainu, who regarded the glory of the Navy as his life, was really angry. The naval port of the Navy headquarters was bombed. It was like riding on his face and smack his face. Fujitora, with your knowledge, can you find the murderer? Sengoku turned his head and looked at Fujitora beside him. Fujitora was stunned for a moment, then shook his head with a wry smile. There are too many people. Even if you have the knowledge of the sky-high level, if you want to find one person among the tens of thousands of navies, 2.8 is simply a fantasy. Akainu also understood in an instant, turned his head with a black face, a little embarrassed. He was too impatient. Report. Sirs, I think it's time to focus on Mary Joa, where rescue is still waiting. As for the murderer, I suggest sending an elite team to look for it. Suddenly a voice came from the back of the crowd. The speaker was a newly promoted major general, who was just in his early 30s. It was at the peak of his momentum. Even if he was watched by everyone, his straight waist did not change in the slightest. Chapter 378 The Fateful Showdown, Aokiji vs. Akainu. When he saw this person, a look of reminiscence appeared on Zongguo's face. Once upon a time, he was also so energetic and so fearless. However, everything is for the world. Thinking of this, Sengoku's eyes became firm again. Major General Urich, now we know too little information, and we can even say that we don't understand the power of the criminal gang that attacked Mary Joa. It is too dangerous to send a small number of troops to attack. So, wait with peace of mind, said the Warring States period and suddenly smiled. I will go down to help clear the port in a while. Come here if you are willing, it will speed up a lot of efficiency. This is an invitation to join us. What is that new vocabulary called? Moving bricks, Fujitora said with a light smile. What, don't like it? No, gladly. On the top floor gradually eased, but everyone understood that this would also make them laugh for the last time in a short period of time. Mary Joa is destroyed, and the entire world government will be paralyzed. The world is about to face the darkest chaotic era in 800 years. A few minutes later, a group of high-ranking officers followed the Warring States to the port, rolled up their sleeves and prepared to start carrying the boulders. No one noticed that Akainu came to the end at some point, frowned, and looked at the port and Mary from time to time. Chao Ya's direction seemed to be hesitating. This state lasted for more than 10 minutes, until with a burst of explosions, a boulder blocking the port was shattered. Akainu glanced at the messy port, and after estimating the time in his heart, his brows suddenly wrinkled. Stand up. Even with the participation of a large number of senior officers, it would take at least an hour to clear the port, allowing several warships to leave the port at the same time. Only a few warships can leave the port at the same time. It is impossible for the nearly 100 warships of Marin Fando to truly be assembled within 2 to 3 hours. After such a long time, the prisoners may have run away. Thinking of this, Akainu no longer hesitated, threw the stone in his hand, and hurriedly found the Sengoku who was carrying the boulder with his fruit ability. Sakazuki, what's wrong? Warring States turned his back to Sakazuki and asked indifferently while carrying the boulder. However, at this time, the face of the Warring States was indeed deeply helpless. Guessed by that guy Roha again, it turned out that Sakazuki was the first to look for him. This guy, Sakazuki, is too straight. As for the reason for Sakazuki to look for him, the Warring States period did not need to ask. It was nothing more than that a part of the route had been opened up, and the boat could pass through. Sakazuki wanted to go to Marijoa to investigate the situation first. Sure enough, after hearing Sengoku's inquiry, Sakazuki made a request to be the first to be dispatched. WQ. It's the expected answer again. Warring States looked at Sakazuki with a strange look, nodded and agreed to Sakazuki's request. Kasuki made a decisive decision, selected a group of elites from the navy in the port, and immediately drove a small warship to the direction of Marijoa at high speed. Watching Sakazuki's departure, the Warring States period froze in place, not moving for a long time. After an unknown amount of time, a long sigh sounded, and Sengoku shook his head with a wry smile. Two enemies. Above the sea, warships sail through the waves. Sakazuki stood on the bow, with a solemn expression and a hint of anxiety. It has been an hour since the news of Marijoa's destruction, and no new news has come yet. The Tianlong people suffered heavy casualties and even destroyed them. It was already a sure thing. Although Sakazuki was not flustered by the death of the Tianlong people, he was even a little happy, but Marijoa was the headquarters of the world government after all. If it was destroyed, the consequences are unimaginable. If even the 5 old stars were dead, who should rule the world government? Navy. Navy rules the world. Suddenly, this thought appeared in Sakazuki's mind, and as soon as it appeared, it dispelled all the thoughts in his mind and occupied Sakazuki's mind. Looks like it's a good thing that Marijoa was destroyed. Sakazuki thought absurd thoughts. Just as Sakazuki was contemplating, a piece of white fell on Sakazuki's clothes. What? Sakazuki frowned slightly, reaching for the white spots on his clothes. When he saw the white gradually melting on his fingertips, his brow furrowed even tighter. Snow. Where does the snow come from on the sea? Ka, ka ka ka, ka, ka. Suddenly, a series of strange sounds entered Sakazuki's ears, causing Sakazuki to look up and look forward. When he saw the scene in front of him, Sakazuki was stunned for a moment, then he clenched his fists suddenly, and his anger rose in his heart. Glacier. On the vast sea, an endless glacier appeared. Thick solid ice, deeply rooted under the sea, I do not know how deep. With the spread of the glacier and the endless cold wind blowing, the temperature around Sakazuki became a little cold in just a few dozen seconds. At the forefront of the glacier, a tall and slender man was heading towards where Sakazuki was. Under his feet, endless ice was born on the sea, and the white cold air spread in all directions. He is the king of ice, and even the sea must surrender at his feet. Before the man approached, the terrifying aura on his body shocked everyone on board 533. Who is that, Admiral Aokiji? I won't be dazzled, isn't Aokiji General missing? This stance is wrong, how did General Qingzi stop us? A group of sailors gathered at the front of the boat, looking at the green pheasant who was walking slowly and firmly, and there was a lot of discussion. Although the tone was full of doubts, everyone's face was a little ugly. Intercept, Ice Age, menacing. When these words are grouped together, even the stupidest person understands what's going on. It's just that they don't want to admit it. After all, that is the green pheasant. Among the Navy, the green pheasant has a high reputation and an easygoing personality. However, some people don't think so much. Aokiji, you are now a rebel, Sakazuki said in a low voice. The anger in his heart seemed to overflow, and a wave of heat was surging around Sakazuki's body. As if hearing Sakazuki's whispers, Aokiji suddenly stopped in the distance, and immediately stretched out his hand. Hooked your finger. Seeing this, Sakazuki didn't hesitate any longer, jumped up, and the monstrous heat wave turned into a crimson light, sweeping half of the world. The boundless cold air, like a giant beast that devoured the world, rose against the sky, occupying the other half of the world. Lava and ice. Crimson Navy. The war is about to start. Chapter 379 Uranus, appear. Hey, brother Roha, Aokiji and Akainu, who is more powerful K? Quote question mark. Why did Xingtang suddenly remember to ask this? Just curious, brother Roha, don't you want to arrange a fight between the two of them? Lena and Leah asked you to ask. Quote. Was discovered. Relax, if it was before, the confused Aokiji would still be weaker against Akainu, but now, he has found something worth protecting with his life, although he can't say he can win against Akainu, but it will never be defeated. Quote. Things worth protecting with one's life. Like a brother protecting Monet's sister. Besides Monet, and our little Sugar. Sugar, Shy-ing. Recalling the conversation with Sugar once in his mind, Roha couldn't help showing a faint smile on his face. Aokiji vs Akainu. Maybe this time the result will surprise everyone. There is no need to worry about the Navy. The next thing is to look at Uranus. Roha turned his head to look at the pillar of fire in the distance, his eyes narrowed slightly, and a faint red golden light circulated in his eyes. From just now, Roha felt a huge sense of crisis, flowing out from under the ground, and its power was so strong that it even made Roha's breathing a little short. This is definitely the strongest enemy he has ever faced. However, and it didn't help. Roha smiled faintly. Behind him stood countless strong men, and around him, there were nearly 1,000 android soldiers holding Urano's weapons. Under the sea in the distance, there is Kronos as the decisive weapon. He had prepared so much for this day, how could Uranos stop him? It all ends today. The strange mood in his heart gradually calmed down. Roha's straight body was raised a bit again, and a powerful and terrifying aura was brewing around him. However, at this moment, Roha's heart was full of warning signs. He didn't have time to think about it. He subconsciously jumped backwards, dozens of meters away. Scoff. The moment Roha and the others left, a fiery beam of light as thick as it seemed, suddenly protruded from the place where they once stood, swept and cut for hundreds of meters, leaving bottomless cracks wherever they passed. Several android soldiers were even more involved, and were instantly vaporized by it. Everyone beware, the target appears. Everyone scattered, prepare to attack. The gradient sequence is ready, warn Kronos. Without Roha's instructions, everyone's plan began to be executed according to the established plan. The rays of light rose, and hundreds of attacks slammed into the cracks in the ground at the same time. An amazing explosion sounded, and the frozen mountain where Roha and others once stood began to collapse inward instantly. The expected counterattack did not come. Roha frowned slightly, and the next moment, he waved his hand suddenly. The people around immediately began to disperse around, and those with flying ability began to take their companions to the high altitude in the distance. Click, click. Rumble boom. After everyone left for dozens of seconds, centered on the hundreds of meters of cracks on the ground, thousands of huge cracks appeared on the ground, and began to spread around at an alarming speed. If you look at it from the sky at this time, you can find that these cracks have spread to 100 kilometers away in less than 3 minutes, like a huge spider web, appearing on the red soil continent. And the width of each thread of this spider web must be calculated in kilometers. Boom. After a short period of calm, a roar sounded like a meteorite hitting the ground. The center of the spider web suddenly bulged upward, and countless huge boulders turned up, like small mountain peaks appearing on the ground. Boom. Boom. The sound got louder and louder. Boom. Along with the sound of the earth rolling over, a touch of silver suddenly appeared in the center of the spider web. The next moment, the roar of countless engines sounded, and trillions of tons of boulders flew and fell. A cosmic battleship like a crossed cross finally broke the shackles of thousands of years. Uranos class colonial ship, 103 kilometers in the field, 72 kilometers in width, weapon system, weak, shield system, extremely strong. Standing in the roar of countless artillery fire, Roja looked straight at the space battleship wrapped in the blue light shield, and there was a trace of solemnity in his eyes. This is the last trump card of the world government. As long as it is shot down, everything will be over. Let's start. Without saying much, Roja slowly rose to the sky. Behind him, Gilgamesh snorted coldly, glanced at the battleship that dared to fly over his head, and stepped onto the golden boat. Accelerator glanced at Gilgamesh sarcastically, and immediately turned into an afterimage, following behind Roja. At their feet, nearly 1,000 cyborg warriors raised their weapons from Oranos and launched an attack. Thousands of lights bloom. The final battle begins. Chapter 380 Excalibur. Above the sky, the island like Uranus was enveloped by the blue light and swept upwards at a high speed. In just a few tens of seconds, it flew to an altitude of several thousand meters, and the speed continued. Increase. Boom boom boom. Bursts of fire continued to appear on the shield of Oranos, splashing ripples. Although the sky-filled attack could not break Oranos' shield, the shock waves that followed made Oranos tremble. Costello stood in the center of the main control room, watching the less than 20 operators in the main control room, angrily hammering the console in front of him. The explosion was too sudden. Costello and Zobak had difficulty even protecting themselves, and they had no time to save other operators in a hurry. If it wasn't for some people who happened to be doing battleship maintenance in Uranos, it would be difficult for them to even start Uranos. Even now, they cannot activate the full functionality of Uranus. Damn bastards. They definitely had a plan. Costello said bitterly. What about 730 now? Zobak looked at the slowly descending shield energy with a worried expression on his face. What else can I do? Fly directly into space, and at that time, those damn rebels on the ground will be targets. Costello said sharply. However, if the main artillery is bombarded, the Red Earth continent. Zobak's mind came to the image of the battleship firing, and the entire Red Earth continent was smashed into pieces, and the whole person trembled suddenly. No, you can't use the main cannon. The main gun can't work, just use the secondary gun, plus the weapons in the weapons warehouse. I'll see which one to use, I remember. Costello started to operate on the control panel with killing intent on his face. Quick, the screen switched from the main gun and secondary gun to the screen in the weapon warehouse. Nothing. Costello, Zobak. Swish. When the screen went black, Costello pressed the button of the switch, his face a little blank. I must be looking at the wrong place. Costello murmured in a low voice while manipulating, and Zobak nodded dazedly beside him. The screen reappeared, but the weapon warehouse was still empty. Fuck, where's the stuff? Where's Lao Tzu's weapon? Costello shook the screen crazily, roaring non-stop, his face collapsed. Nearly 1,000 technological weapons, but the world government's biggest trump card other than Oranos. With the weapons and Uranus in the weapon warehouse, the world government has the confidence to control the world. However, now one of the two trump cards is gone. Costello was going crazy. Boom. Suddenly, the main control room shook violently. Costello stood unsteadily for a while and almost fell to the ground. After grabbing the console and standing up, he was attracted by the images on the big screen. On the screen, the enemy who just dealt damage to Uranus is displayed. It was something more than 10 meters high and 50 meters long, like a row of boxes. However, on the surface of the box, there are countless dark holes, which are braving bursts of fire. And there are 3 rows of this kind of thing. 100-armed giant system. Looking at the box that glowed again, Costello couldn't help but murmured, his face a little broken. Don't ask him why he knows this ghost, because it's just what's in the weapon warehouse, and it's also a spare weapon on Uranus. An anti-aircraft artillery piece. Now to beat them. Quick, take the 100-armed giant system as the center and scan the ground within a radius of 100 kilometers. Zobak next to him seemed to remember something, and suddenly ordered loudly. Light green light swept across the ground, and soon, all the weapons on the ground appeared on dozens of screens, displayed in front of everyone in the main control room. Looking at the sci-fi weapons on the screen, Costello had no expression on his face. He didn't know what to do with a good expression. If possible, he really wanted these things in the picture he didn't recognize. Thunder Halberd, Hyperion's Glory, Prometheus Tracker. Each one is a weapon that Costello once wanted to have. However, now when these weapons really appeared in front of his eyes, apart from Costello, he could no longer raise the slightest desire. All that was left in his heart was fear. These things really have the power to destroy Uranos. Thinking of this, Costello's heart tightened and he started drinking again. Hurry up, engine full power and fly out into the world. Don't let them attack anymore. In this situation, Uranos did not dare to open cracks in the shield to counterattack. Once the enemy attacked in the way of counterattack, the consequences would be disastrous. 16 small town-sized jets were activated with all their strength, and crimson rays of light poured out continuously, and Uranos took off at a high speed. However, at this moment, just above Uranos' head, a coquettish shout suddenly came. Excalibur!